He paid just $100 for a crumbling mansion everyone said was cursed. But when this single father finally broke through the locked attic door, what he found hidden in the darkness would turn his daughter's life from poverty to a $250 million legacy that nobody saw coming. Before we dive into this story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The rain hammered against the windshield of Marcus Hayes's pickup truck as he sat in the parking lot of Riverside Elementary, waiting for the final bell to ring. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of carpentry work, gripped the steering wheel like it might steady the rest of his life. It didn't. Nothing had felt steady since Sarah died. 18 months had passed, but grief didn't follow a timeline. It lived in the empty passenger seat beside him, in the lunch he'd packed that morning for his 8-year-old daughter Lily, in the mortgage payment he couldn't make this month, in every breath that reminded him he was still here and she wasn't. The steering wheel was worn smooth where his thumbs rested. The vinyl cracked from a decade of work sites and hardware store runs. Marcus stared through the rain-blurred glass at the school's brick facade, watching parents hurry from their cars with umbrellas, their faces bent against the storm. He'd forgotten an umbrella. Again. These days, he forgot a lot of things: doctor's appointments, bill due dates, whether he'd eaten lunch. The only thing he never forgot was Lily. She was his North Star, the single point of light in a world that had gone dark the day Sarah's car hydroplaned on Highway 42, and the universe decided it didn't need his wife anymore. Marcus rubbed his eyes, felt the grit of sawdust still embedded in his skin despite the shower he'd taken that morning. The construction job had ended yesterday, 3 weeks ahead of schedule. The developer, a slick-haired man named Patterson, who wore suits that cost more than Marcus made in a month, had filed for bankruptcy. Just like that. One day Marcus was framing a luxury spec house. The next day he was unemployed, with half his wages unpaid and no recourse but a lawyer he couldn't afford. Patterson's last words had been delivered through his assistant. "Sorry for the inconvenience." Inconvenience. That's what they called it when a man with a daughter to feed lost 2 weeks of wages. The school bell rang, its sound muffled by rain and distance. Marcus straightened up, scanning the crowd of children that poured from the double doors like confetti into the gray afternoon. Purple backpack. He always looked for the purple backpack first. Sarah had bought it the week before the accident, taken Lily to 3 different stores to find the exact right shade. Not lavender, not violet, but deep purple like twilight. There, Lily emerged from the crowd, head down, walking slower than the others. She'd been doing that lately, moving through the world like she was afraid of taking up too much space, like she was trying to make herself small enough that maybe the universe wouldn't notice her and take her too. Marcus's heart cracked a little more, the way it did every time he saw that careful walk, that protective hunch of her shoulders. She was 8 years old. She should be running, laughing, carefree. Instead, she carried grief like a backpack heavier than the purple one on her shoulders. When she climbed into the truck, bringing with her the smell of school cafeteria and wet pavement, her smile was small, careful, the kind that broke his heart a little more each day. "Hey, sweetheart," Marcus said, reaching over to tuck a strand of dark hair behind her ear. It was the same rich brown Sarah's had been, the kind that caught gold in sunlight. Today there was no sunlight. "How was school?" "Fine," Lily said. The universal answer of children protecting their parents from worry. She buckled her seatbelt with practiced efficiency, her small hands working the mechanism with a competence that reminded him she was growing up too fast. She'd had to. Loss had a way of aging children, teaching them lessons they shouldn't need to learn for decades. Marcus pulled out of the parking lot, windshield wipers beating a rhythm against the rain. They drove through Riverside, past the diner where Sarah used to take Lily for chocolate chip pancakes every Saturday, past the library where they'd spent Sunday afternoons, past the park with the swing set. Sarah had pushed Lily on for hours, patient and laughing. The town was full of ghosts, memories wearing familiar faces. Marcus didn't know if they'd ever stop haunting him. He wasn't sure he wanted them to. They drove home to the small rental house on Maple Street, the one with the leaky faucet Marcus kept meaning to fix, and the cracked driveway that collected rainwater like a moat. The house had never been meant to be permanent. They'd moved in 5 years ago, planning to save for a down payment on something bigger, something theirs. But then came medical bills from Sarah's father's last illness. Then the car accident that took Sarah. Then funeral costs and grief counseling for Lily, and 1,000 other expenses that drained their savings account to nothing. Now the rental was all they had, and even that was slipping through his fingers like sand. Inside, the walls were thin, the furniture second-hand, but it was theirs. Lily did her homework at the kitchen table while Marcus heated up leftover spaghetti, stretching it with extra sauce because the paycheck from his last job had been smaller than expected. Half of what he was owed, to be precise. The other half was tied up in Patterson's bankruptcy filing, along with the hopes of a dozen other contractors who'd been foolish enough to trust a man in an expensive suit. Marcus watched Lily bent over her math worksheet, her pencil moving in careful strokes. She bit her lower lip when she concentrated, just like Sarah used to do. The resemblance was getting stronger as she grew older. A gift and a curse. Every day, she looked more like the woman he'd lost. Every day, she reminded him of what their future should have held. Family dinners and dance recitals and graduations and grandchildren. All of it gone in the time it took for tires to lose traction on wet asphalt. "Done," Lily announced, pushing her worksheet toward him for checking. Her handwriting was neat, precise, no mistakes. She was careful with everything now, afraid of getting things wrong, afraid of adding any burden to his load. Marcus checked her work and praised each answer, trying to inject enthusiasm into his voice, trying to be the parent she deserved instead of the hollow man he'd become. After dinner, after dishes, after the bedtime routine that had become sacred in its consistency, teeth brushed, pajamas on, 3 pages from whatever book they were reading together, Marcus tucked Lily into bed. She clutched the stuffed rabbit Sarah had made for her when she was born, its fabric worn soft from years of love. The rabbit's name was Clover, and it had been the last thing Sarah had touched before leaving for work that final morning. Marcus had watched her straighten its ears on Lily's pillow, had heard her whisper, "Keep her safe while I'm gone, Daddy." Lily's voice was small in the darkness, only the glow of her nightlight illuminating her face. "Yeah, sweetheart. Are we going to be okay?" The question pierced him. She was 8 years old and asking if they'd be okay, as if she already understood that stability was an illusion, that safety was a lie the universe told, until it was ready to pull the rug out from under you. "We're going to be fine," Marcus said, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "I promise." It was a promise he had no idea how to keep. After Lily fell asleep, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table with his laptop, scrolling through classified ads and job postings. His eyes were burning, and his coffee had gone cold hours ago. The numbers in his bank account glowed on his phone screen. $347.62. Rent was due in 9 days. $850. He was short by $502.38. The math was simple and devastating. He'd called the landlord already, asked for an extension, explained about the bankruptcy and the unpaid wages. Mr. Morrison had been sympathetic but firm. "I've got a mortgage too, Marcus. I gave you 2 months last winter. I can't keep doing it." The implication was clear: pay or leave. And where would they go? To a shelter? To his sister's overcrowded apartment in Ohio, where she was barely making ends meet with her own 3 kids? To his truck, sleeping in parking lots like some modern-day homeless family? Marcus refreshed the job listings for the 3rd time that hour. Nothing new. The construction industry in Riverside was tight, everyone competing for the same limited work. He'd put in applications at 6 different companies, hadn't heard back from any of them. He was a good carpenter, skilled with his hands, reliable, but that didn't matter when there were 20 good carpenters competing for every open position. He was about to close the laptop, surrender to another sleepless night of staring at the ceiling and calculating impossible math, when he saw it. A real estate auction listing, buried under dozens of foreclosures and estate sales. The photograph was grainy, barely visible through years of digital compression, but something about it caught his eye. The headline was clear: Historic Mansion Auction. Minimum bid, $100. No reserve. Marcus clicked on the listing, his exhausted brain struggling to make sense of what he was reading. The mansion sat on 12 acres outside the town of Millbrook Falls, about 40 minutes north of Riverside. The description was sparse, almost deliberately vague. Estate sale. As-is condition. Built 1897. Significant repairs needed. Serious bidders only. The photograph showed a sprawling Victorian structure, with turrets and wraparound porches, half hidden behind overgrown trees. Even in decay, it was magnificent. 3 stories tall, with gingerbread trim and arched windows that spoke of a time when craftsmanship mattered, when people built things to last. Marcus scrolled down to the comments section, where locals had left their opinions. Nobody's lived there in 30 years. The last owner disappeared. My grandmother said the Whitmore family was cursed. Town tried to condemn it twice, but something always stopped them. Foundations probably cracked. Roof needs total replacement. Good luck getting insurance on that death trap. Asbestos City. Lead paint for sure. It's been vandalized. Trust me. Not worth it, even for free. He should have closed the laptop. He should have gone to bed. Instead, he clicked through page after page of information. The mansion had belonged to Tobias Whitmore, a reclusive collector who died in 1993. The property had been tied up in legal complications for 30 years. Something about contested wills and missing heirs and bureaucratic tangles that had kept it frozen in time. Now the county was finally auctioning it off. As is. No warranties. No inspections. Sold to the highest bidder, with a minimum bid of $100. Marcus stared at the number. $100. He had $347.62. If he bid $100 and won, he'd have enough left over for gas, basic utilities for a month, and maybe, just maybe, a fresh start. The mansion would need work. Obviously. Significant work, if the comments were accurate. But that's what he did. He built things. He fixed things. He took broken structures and made them whole again. His mind raced through possibilities. 12 acres. They could grow their own food, be self-sufficient. The house was big enough to take in boarders maybe, rent out rooms to offset costs. Or he could flip it, restore it over time and sell it for profit. Or just have a home, a real home that was theirs, not rented, not temporary, but permanent. A place where Lily could grow up, where she could have her own room and space to breathe. And maybe, eventually, heal. It was insane. It was desperate. But desperation had become his constant companion. And at least this time, it came with 12 acres and the ghost of possibility. The auction was set for the following Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. Marcus pulled up his calendar, checking work commitments. He had none. No jobs lined up. No interviews scheduled. Nothing but empty days stretching ahead until the money ran out completely. He clicked register to bid before he could talk himself out of it. The form asked for basic information: name, address, proof of funds. Marcus uploaded his bank statement, showing the $347.62, hoping it would be enough. Within minutes, he received a confirmation email. Bidder number 94. You are registered for Lot 47, Whitmore Estate. Auction begins 10 o'clock sharp, Tuesday, October 17th. Please bring photo ID and payment method. Marcus closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of his kitchen, listening to the drip of the leaky faucet he'd been meaning to fix for months, the hum of the refrigerator that rattled like it might die any day, the creak of the old house settling around him. He thought about Sarah, about what she would say if she could see him now. She'd always been the practical one, the planner, the person who read fine print and considered consequences. But she'd also been brave. She'd believed in possibility, in taking chances when the right chance came along. Tell me I'm not crazy, he whispered to the empty room, to her ghost, to anyone listening. The house offered no answer. The drip continued, the refrigerator hummed, and Marcus sat alone with his gamble, wondering if he'd just made the smartest decision of his life, or the stupidest. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he researched. He looked up property records for Millbrook Falls, tax assessments, comparable sales. The Whitmore estate was unique, no real comparables to measure against. He found old newspaper articles about Tobias Whitmore, a reclusive millionaire who'd made his fortune in textiles and spent his later years traveling the world. There were rumors of a vast art collection, but nothing confirmed. Mostly, there were questions. Why had he lived alone? Why had the property been abandoned? What had happened in the 30 years since his death that had kept the house frozen in legal limbo? By Monday night, Marcus had convinced himself to go through with it. He'd arranged for Mrs. Anderson, his neighbor, to watch Lily after school on Tuesday. He'd filled his truck with gas, using $20 of his dwindling funds. He'd pressed his one good button-down shirt and found his least worn jeans. He'd done everything except tell Lily where he was going. How could he explain gambling their last dollars on a house nobody wanted? How could he burden her with hope that might shatter? Tuesday morning arrived cold and clear. Marcus made Lily breakfast, packed her lunch, walked her to the bus stop, and told her he'd see her after school. She waved from the window as the bus pulled away, her purple backpack visible through the glass. Marcus watched until the bus disappeared, then climbed into his truck and started driving north. The drive to Millbrook Falls took him through winding country roads lined with bare trees and forgotten farms. October in upstate territory, the leaves just beginning to turn, the air carrying the sharp scent of coming winter. Marcus drove with his windows down despite the cold, letting the wind clear his head, letting the landscape remind him that there was a world beyond his grief and his debt and his failing. The town of Millbrook Falls was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and newcomers were noticed immediately. Population 2,800 according to the sign at the town limits. Main Street was lined with brick buildings from another era. A diner, a hardware store, a library, a post office. American flags hung from lampposts. Pumpkins decorated storefronts. It looked like a postcard from a simpler time, though Marcus knew better than to trust appearances. Every small town had its secrets, its struggles, its people barely holding on. The auction was held at the county courthouse, a gray stone building that smelled like old paper and broken promises. Marcus entered a room where maybe 15 people sat scattered among rows of folding chairs. Most looked like investors or developers, men in suits, with leather portfolios and calculating eyes. One woman in a sharp blazer was typing rapidly on her phone. Two men in the back whispered to each other, pointing at documents. Marcus, in his pressed shirt and jeans, his work boots still carrying traces of sawdust, felt like an imposter. He was a carpenter, a widower, a desperate father. He didn't belong in rooms where people bought and sold properties like trading cards. He took a seat in the back row. Bidder number 94 clutched in his hand like a lifeline. The other bidders didn't acknowledge him. He was invisible, irrelevant, not worth their attention. That was fine. Marcus had spent the last 18 months feeling invisible. At least here, his invisibility might work in his favor. The auctioneer arrived at 9:55. A thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a clipboard that looked older than Marcus. He called the room to order at precisely 10 o'clock. His voice carrying the practiced boredom of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The first few lots went quickly. Commercial properties, vacant land, a strip mall. The bidding was brisk, professional, completely foreign to Marcus's experience. He watched and learned, trying to understand the rhythm, the silent language of nods and raised cards. Then came Lot 47. The Whitmore Estate, the auctioneer announced, reading from his clipboard. 12.3 acres with existing structure. Victorian mansion built 1897. Sold as is, no warranties expressed or implied. Significant structural issues documented. Buyer assumes all liability. Minimum bid is $100. Do I have $100? Silence. Complete, profound silence. Marcus's heart pounded so hard he thought everyone in the room could hear it. The investors flipped through their papers, whispering to each other. Several shook their heads. One man actually laughed. A sharp bark of sound that echoed in the quiet room. That place is a money pit, someone muttered. Foundations probably gone. Asbestos, lead paint, you name it. Haunted too, if you believe the locals. Anyone who bids on that is an idiot. The auctioneer repeated himself, his voice taking on a slightly desperate edge. $100. Ladies and gentlemen, do I have $100? This is prime real estate. 12 acres in a desirable location. Someone must be interested at $100. More silence. Marcus felt his arm begin to rise, as if it wasn't connected to his body anymore, as if some other force was lifting it. His hand went up. Bidder card 94 visible to everyone in the room. The auctioneer's gaze snapped to him. $100 to bidder 94. Do I have 125? Nothing. The room stayed silent. Marcus felt eyes turning toward him now, assessing him, probably finding him wanting. The man who'd laughed earlier shook his head in pity or disgust, or both. Going once at $100, the auctioneer said, his voice rising with practiced drama. Marcus held his breath. His arm stayed raised. This was it. This was either the smartest thing he'd ever done or the stupidest. And he was about to find out which. Going twice at $100. The auctioneer scanned the room one final time, giving the professionals one last chance to jump in, to save Marcus from himself. Nobody moved. Sold for $100 to bidder 94. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through Marcus's entire body, through his bones and blood, and the hollow space where his certainty used to live. He'd done it. He'd just bought a mansion for the price of a decent dinner. Around him, the investors were already moving on to the next lot, dismissing him and his purchase with barely a glance. But Marcus saw one man staring at him, really staring. The man was older, maybe 70, with silver hair combed back from a weathered face and eyes that held something Marcus couldn't quite name. Pity, maybe. Or warning. Or recognition. As if he saw in Marcus something familiar. Something he'd once been himself. The man opened his mouth as if to speak, then seemed to think better of it. He gave Marcus a single slow nod. A gesture that might have meant good luck, or I'm sorry, or welcome to the club of fools. Then he turned and walked out of the courthouse, leaving Marcus alone with his gamble and the paperwork that would make it real. An hour later, Marcus stood on the courthouse steps, holding the deed in his trembling hands. The property was his, all 12.3 acres of it, including one deteriorating Victorian mansion, and whatever secrets it held. The deed was heavy, cream-colored paper with ornate lettering, and a gold seal that looked like something from another century. Whitmore Estate. It read, Owner, Marcus David Hayes. Date of purchase, October 17, 2023. Purchase price, $100. $100, written out in careful script like it was $1 million. Marcus stared at the number until it stopped making sense, until it became just shapes on paper, meaningless symbols that held the weight of his entire future. He pulled out his phone with shaking fingers and called Lily. Mrs. Anderson answered, the sound of children playing in the background. She's fine, Marcus. Having a snack. Want to talk to her, please? A moment later, Lily's voice came through, bright and clear. Hi, Daddy. Hey, sweetheart. How was school? Good. We learned about the solar system. Did you know Jupiter has 79 moons? Marcus smiled despite himself. I didn't know that. That's amazing. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Listen, I have a question for you. How would you feel about moving to a bigger house? Silence on the other end. Then, cautiously, what kind of bigger house? A really big house. With lots of rooms and land. A place we could call our own. Not rented, just ours. More silence. Will it feel like home? The question broke him and rebuilt him in the same moment. That's what mattered to her. Not size or luxury or possibility, but whether it would feel like home, whether she'd be safe there, whether it would have space for her grief and her toys and her dreams. Marcus looked out at the rolling hills beyond the courthouse, at the vast October sky with clouds moving fast and purposeful, at the road that would take him north to Millbrook Falls and the mansion he now owned. I'm going to make sure it does, he promised. I'm going to make sure it does. He drove straight there, unable to wait, needing to see it again, to confirm that it was real and not some fever dream brought on by desperation and debt. The address led him down a long, winding driveway, gravel crunching under his tires, overgrown trees forming a tunnel overhead. Then the trees opened up, and there it was, the Whitmore estate. Marcus stopped the truck and sat staring, his hands frozen on the wheel. The mansion rose 3 stories tall, its Victorian bones still visible beneath decades of neglect. 4 turrets stood at the corners like sentries, their pointed roofs dark against the afternoon sky. A wraparound porch sagged in places but still encircled the entire first floor. Windows, dozens of them, reflected clouds and bare branches. Gingerbread trim hung loose in spots, and the grey paint peeled in long strips, revealing bare wood beneath like flesh showing through torn clothing. The roof had lost shingles in patches, creating gaps that let sky show through. Ivy claimed the east wall, crawling up 3 stories toward the chimney like reaching fingers. It was falling apart. It was magnificent. It was his. Marcus got out of the truck slowly, boots sinking into soft earth. The ground stretched out in all directions. Wild gardens to the east, what looked like an old carriage house to the west, a pond visible through trees to the south. 12 acres. 12 acres that belonged to him and Lily now. Bought for $100 and a prayer. He approached the front porch carefully, testing each step before trusting his weight to it. The wood groaned but held. The heavy brass keys the county clerk had given him felt ancient in his hand. A ring of maybe 20 keys, each labeled with faded tags. Front door, cellar, east wing, attic. That last one caught his eye. Someone had underlined it twice in faded ink, then added a small star beside it. Marcus filed that detail away and selected the key marked front door. He expected resistance, expected rust, and decades of settling to make entry difficult. But the key slid in smoothly, too smoothly for a door that hadn't been opened in 30 years. The lock turned with a well-oiled click. Marcus hesitated, his hand on the ornate brass doorknob. This was the moment. Once he stepped inside, there was no going back. He'd committed his last dollars to this place. He'd promised Lily a home. Whatever waited inside, whatever decay or danger or disappointment, he'd have to face it. He pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, a low sound that echoed through the interior like the house was exhaling after holding its breath for 3 decades. Cold air flowed out, carrying with it a smell Marcus recognized from his carpentry work. Old wood, undisturbed dust, the particular scent of a building that had been sealed away from the world. But underneath that, something else. Not decay or mold or the rot he'd expected. Something drier, more preserved, almost like a library. The foyer was enormous. A grand staircase curved up to the 2nd floor, its banister carved with intricate details that must have taken craftsmen months to complete. Above, a massive chandelier hung from a vaulted ceiling, its crystals dulled by dust, but still catching the afternoon light that filtered through dirty windows. To the left, an arched doorway led to what appeared to be a parlor. To the right, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves suggested a library. Straight ahead, a hallway stretched back into shadows, lined with closed doors on both sides. Everything was covered in dust, a thick layer that muffled sound and turned surfaces gray. But nothing appeared vandalized. No broken furniture, no graffiti, no signs of teenagers breaking in for parties or homeless people seeking shelter. It was as if someone had simply walked out one day 30 years ago and never returned, leaving everything exactly as it was. Marcus took a cautious step inside. The floorboards creaked but felt solid beneath his weight. He moved to the parlor first, pushing open the door to reveal furniture, still arranged as if waiting for guests. A sofa and chairs sat around a cold fireplace. Side tables held lamps with dusty shades. On the mantel, a clock had stopped at 3:15. Though whether morning or afternoon, decades ago or last week, Marcus couldn't tell. He moved through the house slowly, opening doors and windows, letting light and air into spaces that had been dark and sealed for most of his lifetime. Every room revealed new wonders and new concerns. A dining room with a table that could seat 20. A kitchen with an ancient cast-iron stove and a hand pump at the sink that, when Marcus tried it, actually produced water after a few sputtering coughs. A conservatory with cracked glass panels and the skeletal remains of plants long dead. A bathroom with a clawfoot tub and fixtures that looked original to the house. Upstairs, the second floor had bedroom after bedroom, some with furniture still in place, covered by white sheets that looked like ghosts in the fading afternoon light. Marcus pulled back one sheet to reveal a four-poster bed with an ornate headboard. The mattress probably ruined, but the frame still solid. The third floor was simpler, more utilitarian, probably servants' quarters when the house was built. The ceilings were lower here, the rooms smaller, but still spacious by modern standards. And at the end of the third-floor hallway, Marcus found it. The attic door. It was different from every other door in the house. Heavier, made of thick oak instead of pine, and it was the only door that was locked. Not with the house's original locks, but with a heavy deadbolt installed on the outside. The kind you'd use to keep something in or someone out. The brass was newer than the rest of the house's hardware, maybe 30 or 40 years old. Someone had added this lock deliberately, recently, at least recently, in the house's timeline. Marcus pulled out his ring of keys, found the one labeled attic, with its underline and star. His hand shook slightly as he inserted it into the deadbolt. It turned smoothly, too smoothly, as if someone had oiled it regularly, even as the rest of the house fell into decay. The bolt slid back with a solid thunk that seemed too loud in the quiet hallway. His heart was racing now, though he couldn't explain why. He was about to open a door to an attic in a house he now owned. There was nothing to be afraid of. Just old furniture and maybe some water damage and whatever else people stored in attics. Nothing more. He pushed the door open. Stairs led upward into darkness. The air that flowed out was different from the rest of the house, not stale or musty, but dry, carefully controlled, like the climate-controlled storage units he'd helped build on a job 2 years ago. The smell hit him next. Old paper, aged leather, something else he couldn't identify, but that spoke of preservation, of things carefully kept. Marcus pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing wooden stairs that climbed steeply up. He tested the first step. Solid. No creak. No give. These stairs had been maintained even as the rest of the house crumbled. Someone had cared about access to this attic, had kept it functional for reasons Marcus couldn't yet understand. He climbed slowly, one step at a time, the flashlight beam dancing ahead of him. The stairs turned once, then opened up into the attic proper. Marcus stepped up into the space and stopped breathing. The attic was massive, running the entire length of the house, maybe 80 feet long and 40 feet wide. The ceiling peaked in the center, supported by heavy timber beams that were original to the house's construction. But what stopped Marcus cold, what made his breath catch in his throat and his hands begin to tremble, wasn't the architecture, it was what filled the space. Dozens of large objects stood in careful rows, each one covered in protective cloth. Each one draped and sealed against dust and time. The shapes varied, some tall and rectangular, like paintings, others smaller, placed on pedestals, some irregular, organic, possibly sculptures. They stretched back into the shadows, row after row, like soldiers standing at attention, waiting for orders that never came. Marcus moved forward slowly, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floorboards. Each covered object had a small tag attached to it, yellowed paper with careful handwriting. He approached the nearest one, a rectangular shape about 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide. The tag read, Florence, 1872. His fingers trembled as he grasped the corner of the protective cloth. Part of him wanted to stop, to leave this alone, to walk back down those stairs and pretend he'd never seen this. But that wasn't who Marcus was. He'd spent his whole life finishing what he started, facing what needed to be faced, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Sarah had loved that about him. "You don't quit," she'd said once, after he'd spent a month rebuilding their deck by hand. "Even when you probably should, you don't quit." Marcus pulled the cloth away. The painting underneath stole whatever breath he had left. Even in the dim light of his phone's flashlight, even through the dust motes dancing in the beam, he could see the mastery in every brushstroke. It was a portrait of a woman in profile, her face serene, her hair swept up in a style from another century. The colors were rich despite their age, deep blues and golds, flesh tones that seemed to glow with inner light. The frame was ornate, heavily gilded, clearly antique. The whole thing looked like it belonged in a museum, not in an attic in a crumbling mansion bought for $100. Marcus didn't know much about art. He knew how to frame a wall and hang drywall and build things that were solid and square. But art was Sarah's territory. She'd been the one who dragged him to galleries, who pointed out brushwork and composition, who saw beauty in things he walked past without noticing. But even he could recognize that this wasn't a reproduction or an amateur's work. This was real. This was valuable. This was impossible. He moved to the next covered shape, then the next. Each time he pulled away a cloth, he revealed another masterpiece. Paintings in various styles, landscapes with light that seemed to move, portraits that followed you with their eyes, still life so detailed you could almost smell the fruit. Sculptures in marble and bronze, faces frozen in expressions of joy or sorrow or contemplation. Bodies captured mid-movement, like dancers who'd been turned to stone. Ancient-looking pottery with intricate designs that spoke of civilizations long gone. Books bound in leather with gold embossing, their pages yellowed but intact. Marcus's hands were shaking now, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Who had collected all this? How had it ended up here? And why had it been locked away, sealed and protected but never displayed, never shared, never claimed? He stumbled deeper into the attic, pulling back more cloths, revealing more impossibilities. A sculpture that looked Greek or Roman. A painting in a style he thought might be impressionist. All light and color and movement. Books that looked hundreds of years old. Each piece had its tag. Athens, 1959. Paris, 1963. Madrid, 1978. Dates and cities stretching back decades. A record of acquisition kept meticulously by someone who cared deeply about documentation. At the far wall, pushed into the corner, and almost hidden behind larger pieces, Marcus found a writing desk. It was mahogany, ornately carved, with small drawers and compartments. On its surface sat a leather-bound journal, surprisingly well preserved, its cover embossed with a monogram, T.W. Tobias Whitmore. Marcus's hands were fully trembling now as he opened the journal carefully. The handwriting inside was elegant, old-fashioned, each letter formed with careful precision. The first entry was dated May 3, 1953. "My name is Tobias Whitmore," it began, "and I am hiding the world's most beautiful things where no one will think to look for them." Marcus sank down onto a covered trunk, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. The journal rested open in his lap, the flashlight from his phone propped against another trunk to cast light across the pages. And as afternoon faded to evening and the attic grew darker around him, Marcus Hayes read the story of a man he'd never met, a man who died 30 years before, a man whose legacy he now held in his shaking hands. A man who had just changed Marcus's life in ways he couldn't yet begin to understand. Marcus sat in the growing darkness of the attic, the leather journal open on his lap, and read by the light of his phone. The first entry was dated May 3, 1953, written in elegant script that spoke of fountain pens and unhurried time. "My name is Tobias Whitmore, and I am hiding the world's most beautiful things where no one will think to look for them, not from greed, not from shame, but because I have learned that beauty is fragile and the world is brutal with what it cannot understand or possess. This attic will become a sanctuary, not a tomb, but a shelter, a place where art can exist without the corruption of markets and the violence of wars. Let those who find it worthy prove themselves through patience. Let time be the judge." Marcus turned the page carefully, aware that he was holding something precious, something private. The next entries detailed Tobias's first acquisition, a painting purchased in Florence from a family that had fallen on hard times, their ancestors' treasures sold to keep food on the table. Tobias had paid twice what they asked, he noted, because fair price and generous price are not always the same thing. The painting was described in loving detail. A portrait of a merchant's daughter, 1872, artist unknown but clearly trained in the classical tradition. Worth perhaps $5,000 then, worth much more now, if it was authentic. Marcus's eyes flicked to the covered paintings around him. One of them was that merchant's daughter, waiting under her cloth shroud, her value unknowable until someone with expertise could verify what Marcus's gut already suspected. This was real. The journal entries continued, year after year, each acquisition carefully documented. A sculpture from Athens purchased in 1959, books from Paris in the early 60s, pottery from Cairo, paintings from Madrid and Prague, and small villages whose names Marcus had never heard. Tobias wrote, not just about what he bought, but why it mattered, what story each piece told, what moment in human creativity it represented. June 14, 1957. Acquired a Rodin study, bronze, from a dealer in Brussels. The dealer did not know what he had. I paid well above his asking price, because ignorance should not be rewarded with exploitation. This piece shows a figure in torment, muscles straining, face hidden. Rodin understood that beauty and suffering are often inseparable. The world needs reminding. Marcus flipped forward, reading faster now, trying to understand the scope of what surrounded him. The entries revealed a man who was brilliant, cultured, and utterly alone. References appeared to his wife, Eleanor, in the early entries. She traveled with him sometimes, shared his passion for preservation. But by 1962, the entries changed. January 9, 1962. Eleanor died this morning. Pneumonia took her in 4 days. The doctors said there was nothing to be done. I held her hand until the end. She made me promise to continue the collection. She said beauty is the only thing that lasts, that matters. I do not know if I believe her, but I will honor her wish. What else can I do? Marcus's throat tightened. He knew that grief, that desperate need to honor the wishes of someone gone. He'd felt it every day since Sarah died. That drive to be the father she'd wanted him to be, to raise Lily with the values they'd shared, to make decisions that would make Sarah proud even though she'd never see them. The entries after Eleanor's death grew more frequent, more detailed. Tobias threw himself into collecting with renewed intensity. The acquisitions came faster, paintings and sculptures and rare manuscripts. He wrote about each piece as if it were a companion, describing not just its artistic merit but what it meant to him personally, how it fit into the larger story he was building. The collection wasn't random. It was curated, intentional, a narrative told in objects about human creativity across centuries and continents. Then in 1968, another change. March 27, 1968. Received word today that James has been killed in Vietnam. My son, my only child. He was 23 years old. He wanted to serve his country. I wanted him to stay home, to be safe, to inherit all of this someday. We argued. The night before he left, I told him he was being foolish. He told me I was being selfish, hiding away with my treasures while the world burned. We both said things we shouldn't have. Now, I will never have the chance to take back those words, to tell him I loved him, to say I was proud, even though I was afraid. The collection continues, but for whom? There is no one left to leave it to. Marcus closed the journal for a moment, pressing his palms against his eyes. The loneliness in those words, the regret, the profound isolation of a man who'd lost everything that mattered and was left only with beautiful objects that couldn't love him back. He thought of Lily, of their argument last week when she'd wanted to go to a sleepover, and he'd said no because he was afraid, always afraid now, of losing her the way he'd lost Sarah. He'd seen hurt in Lily's eyes, resentment even, and it had terrified him. What if something happened before he could make it right? What if his last words to her were no, were rejection born from fear? He opened the journal again, reading forward. The entries from the 1970s and 80s showed a man increasingly reclusive. Tobias rarely left the mansion. He had dealers bring pieces to him. He wrote about the satisfaction of restoration work, of cleaning centuries of grime from paintings to reveal their true colors, of repairing sculptures damaged by time or careless handling. The attic became his world, his purpose, his reason for continuing. September 2nd, 1979. Worked for 6 hours today on the Caravaggio. The previous owner stored it poorly, let moisture damage the lower corner. Spent weeks treating the canvas, stabilizing the paint. Today I finally saw the full image as it was meant to be seen. The play of light and shadow, the humanity in the saint's face. This is why I do this work. Not for value, but for preservation, so that future generations might see what we are capable of creating when we choose beauty over destruction. Caravaggio. Marcus didn't know much about art, but even he knew that name. Sarah had dragged him to an exhibition once, made him stand in front of a Caravaggio painting for 10 minutes, while she explained chiaroscuro and dramatic tension. The painting had been valued at $50 million, the placard said. protected by glass and guards and insurance policies Marcus couldn't fathom. And there might be one here, in this attic, covered in cloth and hidden from the world for decades. Marcus's hands started shaking again. He flipped to the later entries, watching Tobias's handwriting grow shakier with age. The acquisitions slowed, but never stopped. Each piece was chosen with even more care, as if Tobias knew his time was running out and wanted to make his final selections count. May 17th, 1992. My health fails. The doctors speak in careful euphemisms, but I understand what they're not saying. I have perhaps a year, maybe less. I have spent the last weeks making arrangements. The collection must be protected, but not by my family. They would sell it, piece by piece, scatter it to the highest bidders. They have never understood that these works are not commodities, but conversations across time, connections between creator and viewer that transcend market value. The entry continued, detailing Tobias's plan. He would create legal complications that would tie up the estate for 30 years. By then, he reasoned, the world might have changed. The people who'd wanted to exploit his collection would be gone or retired. New ownership laws might protect artistic heritage better. Or perhaps, he wrote with what Marcus recognized as desperate hope, the right person would find it. Someone who needed it as much as it needed them. I am sealing the attic. Climate control has been installed, sophisticated enough to last decades. The deadbolt is new, strong. The key will pass with the property whenever it finally sells. Whoever buys this forgotten house will find the collection, or they won't. Fate will decide. But I leave this journal as explanation and as plea. These works deserve better than darkness. They deserve to be seen, to be shared, to remind people of what we can create when we aspire to something greater than ourselves. If you're reading this, stranger, then you hold 40 years of my life in your hands. What you do with it will speak to who you are. I hope you're someone worthy. I hope you're someone who understands. Tobias Whitmore. The entry was dated June 10, 1993. The next page was blank. Marcus flipped through the rest of the journal, but found no more writing. Tobias must have died shortly after. His final words entrusted to paper and to whoever fortune would eventually bring to this attic. Marcus sat in the darkness, the journal heavy in his lap, surrounded by treasures worth more than he could calculate. He thought about the $100 he'd bid, about the desperation that had brought him to that auction, about the rent he couldn't pay and the daughter who depended on him. And he thought about Tobias Whitmore, dying alone in this house, placing his faith in a future he'd never see, trusting that somehow the universe would send the right person. What if Marcus wasn't the right person? What if he was just a carpenter with no knowledge of art, no understanding of provenance or authentication, or the complicated world of museums and collectors? What if his desperation had led him to something he had no business touching? His phone buzzed, startling him. A text from Mrs. Anderson. Lily's asking when you'll be home. Should I give her dinner? Marcus checked the time. He'd been in this attic for over 3 hours, lost in another man's history. Be there in 45 minutes. He texted back. Thank you. He stood slowly, his legs stiff from sitting on the trunk. He carefully closed Tobias's journal and placed it back on the desk. Then he looked around at the covered shapes, at the fortune hidden under cloth, at the responsibility he'd accidentally inherited. Part of him wanted to cover everything back up, lock the door, pretend he'd never seen this. But he thought of Tobias's final words. These works deserve better than darkness. Marcus descended the attic stairs, locked the deadbolt behind him, and drove home to his daughter with more questions than answers, and a secret that weighed like lead in his chest. That night, after Lily was asleep, Marcus sat at his kitchen table and did what he'd learned to do when overwhelmed. He made a list. On a legal pad he wrote, "What I know. 1. I own a mansion bought for $100. 2. The attic contains dozens, maybe hundreds of art pieces. 3. Tobias Whitmore spent 40 years collecting them. 4. He wanted them preserved and shared. 5. I have no idea what they're worth, or if they're authentic. 6. I need help." Under that, he wrote, "What I need: expert authentication, legal advice, understanding of what I'm legally allowed to do, information about Tobias and his collection, time to think." What he didn't write but felt in every cell of his body. What Lily needs: stability, security, a home, a father who makes good decisions, a future that isn't defined by struggle. The next morning, Marcus drove Lily to school and then headed straight to the Millbrook Falls Library. It was a small brick building on Main Street, the kind of library that smelled like old books and ran on the passion of volunteers and tiny municipal budgets. The librarian at the front desk was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a sweater covered in cat hair. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking up from her computer. "I hope so," Marcus said. "I'm looking for someone who knows about art. Like, really knows about art. Authentication, valuation, that kind of thing." The librarian, whose nameplate read Patricia, studied him for a moment. "Are you the one who bought the Whitmore place?" Marcus blinked. "How did you?" "Small town," Patricia said with a knowing smile. "Word travels. So you found something interesting in that old house." Marcus hesitated. He hadn't told anyone, had barely processed it himself. But he needed help, and small-town discretion was a myth anyway. "I might have. I need someone trustworthy to take a look." Patricia nodded slowly. "You might want to talk to Diane Foster. She's not local, but she stays in town every few months. She's some kind of traveling art consultant. Works with estates and private collections. Very professional, very discreet. Actually," she glanced at the clock, "I think she's here now. Saw her at Rosie's Diner this morning, corner booth. She's there every morning at 9 o'clock sharp when she's in town." Marcus thanked her and walked the 3 blocks to Rosie's. A classic small-town diner with red vinyl booths and a counter where old men nursed coffee and complained about property taxes. He spotted her immediately. A woman in her mid-50s sitting alone in the corner booth. Grey hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Reading glasses perched on her nose. Papers spread across the table. She wore a blazer over a simple blouse and had the focused expression of someone who'd learned to work anywhere. Marcus approached slowly, suddenly aware of how he looked. Work jeans, flannel shirt, sawdust, probably still in his hair despite the shower. He was about to interrupt someone clearly important with a story that sounded insane. "Excuse me," he said when he reached her booth. "Are you Diane Foster?" She looked up, her gaze sharp and assessing, the look of someone trained to evaluate things quickly. "I am, and you are." Marcus Hayes. "I bought the Whitmore estate, the mansion outside town." Her expression changed immediately, a flicker of interest breaking through professional neutrality. The place that finally sold last week. I heard it went for practically nothing. $100. Marcus confirmed. And I found something. In the attic. I need someone to tell me if it's real. Diane set down her coffee cup slowly, giving Marcus her full attention now. What kind of something? Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her the photos he'd taken the previous evening. Close-ups of the tags with their dates and locations. Wider shots showing the rows of covered objects. Detail shots of frames and pedestals visible beneath the cloths. He documented everything methodically. The carpenter in him understanding the importance of thorough records. Diane took the phone, zooming in on one image, then another. Marcus watched the color drain from her face. Her hands started shaking slightly. "Where did you say this was?" she asked. Her voice careful, controlled. "The Whitmore mansion. Locked in the attic. There are dozens of pieces. Maybe more. I've barely looked at a fraction of them. But there's a journal, written by Tobias Whitmore. He documented every acquisition. Dates, locations, what he paid, why it mattered." Diane looked up at him, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine shock. "I need to see these in person." "Now, I was hoping you'd say that," Marcus said. "But I need to know something first. If they're real, if they're valuable, what happens next? What am I legally allowed to do?" Diane took a deep breath, clearly trying to calm herself, to think through the implications. "If they're what I think they are based on these photographs, then you've just made one of the most significant art discoveries in decades, maybe longer, and your life is about to become very, very complicated." Marcus thought about Lily, about the rent he couldn't pay, about the promise he'd made to give her a home. "It's already complicated," he said quietly. "But I promised my daughter I'd give her a stable life. I keep my promises." Diane stood up, gathering her papers quickly, her hands still trembling slightly. "Then, let's go see what Tobias Whitmore left you. Because if even one of these pieces is authentic, you're not just a carpenter anymore, Mr. Hayes. You're the guardian of something priceless." 20 minutes later, Diane followed Marcus's truck in her rental car, a sensible sedan that seemed at odds with the magnitude of what they were about to see. When they pulled up to the Whitmore estate, Diane got out slowly, her eyes taking in the deteriorating Victorian mansion with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Reverence, maybe. Or concern. Or both. "I've driven past this place a dozen times," she said, adjusting her blazer. "Never thought I'd see inside." Marcus unlocked the front door and led her through the foyer, up the grand staircase, past the second floor with its ghost-covered furniture, up the narrow stairs to the third floor. When they reached the attic door, he paused. "Before we go up, I should tell you, there's a journal. Tobias wrote about why he did this, what each piece meant to him. It's not just a collection. It's a life's work." Diane nodded. "That makes it even more important. Collections without context are just objects. Collections with stories are legacies." Marcus unlocked the deadbolt. The door swung open, revealing the dark stairway. He flipped the light switch, and the bare bulbs he'd gotten working the previous evening flickered to life, casting harsh light across the attic's contents. Diane climbed the stairs behind him. When she reached the top and saw the rows of covered objects stretching back into the shadows, she stopped. Her hand went to her mouth. For a long moment, she didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at what surrounded them. "Oh my God," she finally whispered. "Oh my God." Marcus handed her Tobias's journal. The owner documented everything. Dates, origins, what he paid. It's all here. Diane took the journal with trembling hands but didn't open it. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the attic's contents. Slowly, like someone in a dream, she walked to the nearest covered painting. She read the tag, Florence, 1872. She looked at Marcus, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "May I?" He nodded. She pulled the cloth away with infinite care, the fabric sliding off to pool at her feet. The painting was revealed inch by inch. The profile of the merchant's daughter, the masterful brushwork, the gilded frame catching the light. Diane made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "This portrait," she said, her voice shaking. "There are records of it in Italian art registries. It was thought to be lost in a private collection fire in 1957. The art world has mourned it for decades. We have photographs from before the supposed fire, descriptions in period catalogues. But the original was declared destroyed." She reached out but didn't touch the painting, her hand hovering inches from the canvas. "This is it. This is the original. I would need to authenticate it properly. But the brushwork, the frame, the age of the canvas, this is real." She moved to another covered shape, then another. Each revelation brought a new gasp, a new impossibility. A sculpture she identified as possibly a Rodin study, listed as missing from a Belgian estate sale in the 50s. A first edition book that collectors believed had been destroyed during World War II. A painting in the Impressionist style that made Diane actually sit down on the floor, her legs giving out. "This can't be," she whispered, staring up at the painting. "This is listed as lost. The artist died in 1890, and most of his work was destroyed by his family after a scandal. Only 7 paintings are known to survive. This would be number 8. Do you understand what that means?" Marcus sat down beside her on the dusty floor. "I understand I bought a house for $100 and found something I don't know how to handle." Diane laughed weakly, the sound echoing in the vast attic. That's the understatement of the century. She turned to face him directly, professional composure cracking to reveal genuine emotion. "Marcus, I would need weeks to properly authenticate and value everything in this room. But based on what I'm seeing, based on my 25 years working with estates and museums and private collections, you're not looking at millions. You're looking at hundreds of millions, possibly $250 million or more." The number hung in the air between them like something physical. Marcus felt it press down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. $250 million. He'd bought this house because he couldn't make rent, because he had $347.62, and no idea how he'd feed his daughter next month. And now this woman was telling him he owned $250 million in art. "I need to ask you something," Diane said, still sitting on the floor beside him. "And I need you to answer honestly. What do you want to do with this?" Marcus had been asking himself the same question since last night. "I don't know," he admitted. "Yesterday, I was behind on rent. Today I'm sitting in an attic that might hold $250 million. I don't even know how to begin processing that." Diane nodded slowly. "Let me tell you what will happen if this gets out, because it will get out eventually. First, there will be legal questions. The estate sale was legitimate, so legally the collection is yours, but there will be challenges. People claiming Tobias promised them pieces, or saying he wasn't of sound mind when he made his plans. Then there are the museums. They'll want to acquire pieces, study them, display them. Some will be genuinely interested in preservation and education. Others just want the prestige of owning something rare. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Private collectors will make offers, some legitimate, most not. Dealers will swarm. The media will descend. Your face will be on television, in newspapers. Everyone will want something from you, and through all of it, you'll need to protect yourself and your daughter from people who see you as either a meal ticket or an obstacle to what they want. And what do you want? Marcus asked, needing to know if he could trust her. Diane smiled faintly. Professionally, I'd love to be the one to authenticate and catalog this collection. It would be the capstone of my career, the kind of project people remember. Personally, she looked around the attic, at the covered treasures waiting in the shadows. I'd like to see these pieces treated with the respect they deserve. Tobias Whitmore spent 40 years building this collection. He protected it with his own resources, never seeking recognition or profit. That kind of dedication is rare. It deserves to be honored, not exploited. He left a note, Marcus said. In the last journal entry, he said what I do with it will speak to who I am. And who are you? Diane asked quietly. Marcus thought about it. He thought about Sarah and the values she'd lived by. Fairness, integrity, compassion. He thought about Lily, growing up in a world that sometimes felt like it valued money over everything else. He thought about his own hands, calloused from honest work, and the pride he'd always felt in building things that lasted, in fixing what was broken and making it whole again. I'm a father, he said finally, and I'm a carpenter. I make things, I fix things, I build things that shelter people, and I guess, he looked around the attic at the covered treasures, I guess I'm someone who respects what other people have built too. Tobias spent 40 years creating this. I don't want to see it scattered or exploited. But I also don't know what the hell I'm doing. Diane extended her hand. Then let's do this right. Let me help you figure out what you have and what it's worth. From there, you can decide what comes next. But I promise you, Marcus, if you let me, I'll make sure this collection gets the care and attention Tobias would have wanted. No exploitation, no shortcuts, just honest work. Properly done. Marcus shook her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. Where do we start? We start with documentation, Diane said, standing up and brushing dust from her blazer. Every piece needs to be photographed, measured, described. We need to cross-reference Tobias's journal with historical records. Verify provenances. Check for any red flags. Some pieces will authenticate easily. Others will need extensive analysis. Paint dating, material testing, expert consultation. She pulled out her phone and started making notes. I have 2 assistants I trust, absolutely. Robert specializes in sculpture and 3-dimensional works. Keiko is a provenance researcher, one of the best. Between the 3 of us, we can handle the initial assessment, but eventually, we'll need to bring in more experts. Conservators, materials scientists, specialists in specific periods or styles. How long will that take? Marcus asked. Weeks at minimum. More likely months. This is detective work, Marcus. Each piece is a mystery to solve. Where did it come from? Who made it? How did Tobias acquire it? Is it what we think it is? Every answer leads to more questions. Marcus's phone buzzed. Another text from his landlord. Need rent by Friday, or filing eviction. Sorry, but business is business. Friday was 3 days away. Marcus stared at the message, then at the covered masterpieces surrounding him. Behind that door was enough wealth to solve every problem he'd ever had. And yet he couldn't touch any of it. Not yet. Not until he understood what he truly held and what responsibility came with it. He texted back, "Moving out. Will drop off keys." He'd worry about money later. Right now, he had work to do. Over the following days, the attic became Marcus's world. He moved into the mansion completely, camping out in one of the second-floor bedrooms with sleeping bags and a camp stove. Lily thought it was an adventure, sleeping in a mansion like they were explorers claiming new territory. She didn't know about the attic yet. Marcus had kept it locked, telling her the space needed structural repairs before it was safe to enter. It wasn't exactly a lie. Diane brought her team. Robert, a soft-spoken man in his 60s, with gentle hands and encyclopedic knowledge of sculptural techniques, and Keiko, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, who could trace an object's ownership history through archives Marcus didn't know existed. Together, they worked 12-hour days, carefully documenting each piece. Marcus helped where he could, moving pedestals, adjusting lights, holding measuring tapes. Mostly, he learned. He learned that authentication wasn't just about looking at something and declaring it real. It was about evidence, provenance records, material analysis, stylistic consistency, historical context. Every piece told a story, and you had to verify every chapter. He learned that the art world was cutthroat, that dealers would forge documents and bribe experts, and do whatever it took to get their hands on valuable pieces. He learned that even museums could be predatory, pressuring owners to donate pieces or sell below value in exchange for the honor of display. And he learned that trust was rarer and more valuable than any painting. Diane, Robert, and Keiko worked with integrity that Marcus recognized from his own craftsmanship. They didn't cut corners. They didn't guess. They did the work properly, thoroughly, even when it was tedious or difficult. Through it all, Lily adapted to their new home with the resilience of childhood. She explored the grounds, discovered the pond, made friends with a girl from town who came to play in the overgrown gardens. She asked about the attic sometimes, but accepted Marcus's explanations without pressing. She trusted him. That trust felt heavier than any masterpiece. One evening, after Diane and her team had left for the day, Marcus found Lily sitting on the porch steps, watching the sun set over their 12 acres. He sat beside her, putting his arm around her small shoulders. "You okay, sweetheart?" "I like it here," she said simply. "It feels bigger than our old house. Like there's room to breathe." No. Marcus understood exactly what she meant. For 18 months, they'd been compressed by grief, living small, afraid to take up space or hope for more. This place, even in its decay, offered possibility, room to expand, to grow, to imagine a future that wasn't just about survival. "Daddy?" Lily asked, leaning against him. "The lady who's been coming here, Diane. She looks at this house like it's special. Is it?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "The man who lived here before, Tobias Whitmore, he collected beautiful things, art, books, sculptures. He kept them safe for a long time. Now they're ours to take care of. Like we're museum people." Marcus smiled. "Something like that. Will we share them?" "Mommy always said the best treasures are the ones you share." The words pierced him. Sarah had said that, usually when Lily wanted to keep toys to herself instead of playing with other children. The best treasures are the ones you share. Out of the mouths of babes, Marcus thought. His 8-year-old daughter had articulated in one sentence what he'd been struggling to understand for days. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think that's exactly what we should do." That night, after Lily was asleep, Marcus returned to the attic alone. He walked among the covered shapes, pulling back cloths at random, revealing wonders he still couldn't fully comprehend. A sculpture of a dancer, frozen mid-leap, marble so perfectly carved it seemed to capture actual movement. A painting of a stormy sea, waves that appeared to move when you looked at them from different angles. Books bound in leather and gold, their pages holding words written centuries ago. Each piece represented someone's vision, their skill, their desire to create something that would outlast them. And Tobias had spent 40 years gathering them, protecting them, preserving them for a future he'd never see. Marcus thought about his own work, the houses he'd framed, the decks he'd built, the repairs he'd made. Honest work, good work, but temporary. Houses could burn, decks could rot. Nothing he'd built would last centuries or inspire wonder or change how people saw the world. But maybe that was about to change. Maybe this collection was his chance to build something that mattered, something that would last long after he was gone. Not for glory or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. Because Tobias had trusted someone to honor his life's work, and that someone was Marcus. By the end of the second week, Diane presented Marcus with a preliminary report. They sat in what had once been Tobias's study, a room Marcus had cleaned and made functional. Diane spread papers across the desk. Inventories, photographs, initial assessments. 37 paintings, she said, reviewing her notes. 12 sculptures, 23 rare books and manuscripts, 48 pieces of ancient pottery and artifacts, 17 pieces of antique furniture, and various other items including jewelry, textiles, and decorative objects. Total count, 164 individual pieces. She looked up at Marcus. "We've been able to authenticate 87% so far. The remaining pieces need more specialized analysis, radiocarbon dating, pigment testing, expert authentication from scholars in specific periods. But what we have verified is extraordinary. You have works from the Renaissance, the Impressionist period, ancient Greek and Roman artifacts, first editions of books that changed literature, sculptures by masters, whose names appear in every art history textbook." "And the value?" Marcus asked. "Conservative estimate." Diane paused. $240 million. Could go higher, depending on auction conditions and the remaining authentications. Could go lower if provenance issues arise on some pieces. But that's the middle estimate. $240 million. Marcus had known the number was coming, had been preparing for it, but hearing it stated so matter-of-factly still made his vision blur. He'd bought this house for $100. 3 weeks ago, he'd been worried about making rent. "And you're certain it's all mine?" "Legally?" Diane nodded. Robert consulted with 3 different lawyers. Yes, the estate sale was legitimate. Tobias set it up that way deliberately, created legal structures that would tie up the property for exactly 30 years before allowing sale. Everything in this house, including the collection, legally belongs to you. Marcus stood and walked to the window. Outside, Lily was playing in the garden, her laughter carrying through the glass. She was pretending the old fountain was a castle. Her stuffed rabbit, Clover the princess, who needed rescuing. She looked happy. She looked safe. "I want to do something," Marcus said slowly, not looking away from his daughter. "Something that honors what Tobias built. Something that lasts. Tell me what you're thinking," Diane said. Marcus turned back to her. "What if we didn't sell? What if we created a foundation? A museum, maybe? Right here. The Tobias Whitmore collection, kept together the way he intended. Open to the public. Educational programs. Scholarships. The whole thing." Diane's eyes lit up. "That's ambitious. It would take years to set up properly. You'd need significant funding for operations, staff, security, conservation, educational programming." "We'd have funding," Marcus pointed out. "We could sell some pieces to establish an endowment. Keep the core collection intact but use what we need to make it sustainable. And I could do the restoration work on the house. That's what I do. I build things, repair things. I could make this place beautiful again. You'd essentially be donating hundreds of millions of dollars," Diane said carefully, "instead of keeping it for yourself." "I'd be building something," Marcus corrected. "For Lily. For this community. For everyone who believes beautiful things deserve to be shared and protected. That's what Tobias wrote, remember? Beauty deserves better than darkness. I'd just be finishing what he started." They talked for hours, sketching possibilities. A museum on the first floor, rotating exhibits, rooms dedicated to different periods and styles. The second floor could house offices, research space, conservation labs. The third floor could be restored as a glimpse into Tobias's life, his study preserved, his story told. They could offer programs for local schools, artist residencies, lectures, workshops. They could make this place not just a museum, but a living space for creativity and learning. "There's one thing you need to understand," Diane said, as afternoon faded to evening. "If we do this, we'll need to go public. We'll need support from experts, backing from foundations, cooperation from museums and universities. The word will get out, and once it does, everything changes. You won't be anonymous anymore. Your life, Lily's life, will be examined and discussed and judged by people who think they have a right to your decisions." Marcus looked out at Lily again. She'd moved to the pond, was throwing pebbles and counting how many times they skipped. She was 8 years old, still young enough to find joy in simple things, still innocent enough to trust that adults would protect her from harm. How would media attention affect her? How would scrutiny change their quiet life? But he also thought about Tobias, alone in this house, protecting treasures nobody knew existed, dying alone with nobody to see what he'd accomplished. That couldn't be the end of the story. It wouldn't be. "Let's do it," Marcus said. "But we do it carefully. We find the right partners. We make sure Lily's protected. And we make sure Tobias gets the recognition he deserves." Diane pulled out her phone. "Then I know exactly where we start." She made a call, her voice professional and urgent. "David? It's Diane Foster. Remember that favor you said you owed me? I'm calling it in. I need you to come to Millbrook Falls immediately. Trust me, when I say this will be the biggest story of your career." She hung up and looked at Marcus. "David Morrison writes for the Art Times. He's one of the few journalists who still has real integrity. He'll tell your story right. We'll focus on Tobias's legacy and the preservation work instead of just the dollar value. He'll respect your privacy and Lily's. If we're going public, we do it through someone we can trust." Marcus nodded, knowing that with that one phone call, they'd crossed a point of no return. By tomorrow, maybe sooner, the secret of the Whitmore estate would begin to spread. And Marcus Hayes, the carpenter who'd bought a mansion for $100, would have to learn how to be something else entirely. He'd have to learn how to be a guardian, a steward, a man worthy of the trust a dead stranger had placed in him 30 years before his time. That night, Marcus sat with Lily on the porch, watching stars emerge over their 12 acres. "Big changes are coming," he told her, pulling her close. "Good changes, I think, but big ones. There will be attention, people asking questions, wanting to know about us and this place. Will we still be us?" she asked, her voice small. "Always," Marcus promised. "No matter what happens, no matter how big this gets, we'll always be us. That's not changing." Lily nodded against his shoulder. "Okay. As long as we're together, it's okay." As the night deepened and the old house settled around them with its creaks and whispers, Marcus allowed himself to believe it. They would face what was coming together, the way they'd faced everything since Sarah died. One day at a time, one decision at a time, one moment of courage at a time. The fortune in the attic didn't define them. What they chose to do with it would. The article appeared online first at 6:37 in the morning. 3,000 carefully crafted words that rewrote art history in real time. Marcus was making coffee when his phone started buzzing with notifications he didn't understand. By the time he'd poured his first cup, the article had been shared 800 times. By the time Lily came downstairs for breakfast, it had gone viral. Reclusive collector's $250 million treasure trove, discovered in abandoned mansion. Read the headline, accompanied by photographs David Morrison had taken with Marcus's permission. The exterior of the Whitmore estate. Careful shots of select pieces from the collection, and one image of Marcus standing on the porch looking uncomfortable in his flannel shirt and work jeans. The carpenter, who'd bought a mansion for $100 and found a fortune hidden in the attic. The story was fair, exactly what Diane had promised. David had focused on Tobias's dedication, the importance of preservation, Marcus's plans for a foundation and museum. He'd kept Lily's name out of it, referred to her only as Hayes's young daughter. The tone was respectful, emphasizing legacy over sensationalism. It was the best-case scenario for going public. It didn't matter. By the time Marcus dropped Lily off at school, his phone had 96 missed calls. The transformation happened with brutal speed. Millbrook Falls, population 2,800, suddenly found itself at the center of the art world's attention. News vans appeared on Main Street within hours, satellite dishes rising like metallic flowers. Reporters camped outside Rosie's diner, interviewing anyone who'd ever seen the Whitmore estate or heard stories about the reclusive collector who'd lived there. The mayor gave an impromptu press conference praising the discovery as a testament to our town's rich cultural heritage, though everyone knew he'd tried to condemn the property twice for unpaid taxes. Marcus's phone never stopped ringing. Art dealers, museum directors, lawyers, documentary filmmakers, people claiming to be Tobias's long-lost relatives, reporters from every major outlet, even a novelist who wanted to option the story for a book. Each call wanted something. Access to the collection, exclusive interviews, first right of refusal on sales, authentication contracts, media deals. Marcus stopped answering after the first 20 calls. Let them all go to voicemail. Watched the inbox fill with messages he couldn't process. Diane helped him establish boundaries. She knew a lawyer, a sharp woman named Grace Chen, who specialized in estate law and art authentication disputes. Grace arrived from Boston within 48 hours of the article's publication, set up a temporary office in one of the mansion's empty rooms, and immediately went to work building walls between Marcus and the chaos. "You need to understand what's happening," Grace told him during their first meeting. Her voice was calm but firm, the tone of someone who'd seen this before. "People will sue. They'll claim ownership of specific pieces, or fraud, or that Tobias was incompetent when he made his plans. Most of it will be frivolous, nuisance suits designed to force settlements. Some will be legitimate challenges that need proper response. Either way, you need to be prepared for a fight." "I just want to do right by the collection," Marcus said. "I know, but the legal system doesn't care about your intentions. It cares about documentation, precedent, and who has the best lawyers." Grace pulled out a folder already thick with papers. "I've compiled the initial challenges. 3 people claiming to be Tobias's heirs, though records show he had no living relatives when he died. 2 dealers claiming Tobias promised them specific pieces before his death, though they have no contracts or documentation. 1 museum arguing that several pieces were illegally exported from their country of origin and should be repatriated, though Tobias's records show proper export licenses for everything." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "This is going to cost a fortune to defend." "It is," Grace agreed. "But that's why we establish a foundation immediately. Transfer ownership of the collection to a non-profit entity with a clear mission of preservation and education. That makes it much harder to challenge. Puts the collection under the protection of foundation law rather than personal property law. It also provides tax advantages and makes you less of a target for personal lawsuits." Over the next week, Grace worked with Diane and a team of lawyers to establish the Whitmore Foundation. Articles of incorporation, mission statements, board appointments, operating agreements. Marcus read every document twice, making sure he understood what he was signing. The Foundation's mission was simple: preserve and share the Whitmore collection while honoring Tobias's legacy of protecting beauty for future generations. Marcus would serve as board chair. Diane would handle curatorial decisions. Grace would manage legal issues. 2 art historians and a museum director Diane trusted would round out the initial board. But establishing the foundation didn't stop the pressure. If anything, it intensified. A developer from New York offered Marcus $20 million for the property and collection, sight unseen. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," the man said during a phone call Marcus reluctantly took. "You could be set for life. Your daughter would never want for anything. Why tie yourself to this headache when you could cash out now?" Marcus thought about the $20 million, about what it would mean for Lily's future, for her education, for security he'd never dreamed of providing. Then he thought about Tobias's final words. "What you do with it will speak to who you are." "The collection's not for sale," Marcus said. "We're building something that lasts." The developer's tone changed immediately. "You're making a mistake. Running a museum is expensive, complicated. You'll be drowning in debt within 5 years. But when you're ready to sell, call me. I'll still be interested, though my offer will be lower." The call ended. Marcus sat staring at his phone, wondering if the man was right. What did Marcus know about running a museum? He was a carpenter. He fixed broken things with his hands. This was something else entirely. Museums reached out next. Major institutions with prestigious names and significant resources. The Metropolitan Museum of Art wanted first option on any pieces. Marcus decided to loan or sell. The Louvre expressed interest in several specific works for a special exhibition. The Getty offered to partner on the museum project, providing expertise and funding in exchange for co-ownership of select pieces. Each offer was tempting in different ways. These were institutions Marcus had heard of, places Sarah had dragged him to on rare vacations, places that seemed to define what art museums should be. Surely they could do more with the collection than a carpenter in a small town in upstate New York. But each offer also required giving up control, allowing others to decide what happened to Tobias's life work. And something in Marcus resisted that. Tobias had chosen to keep the collection together, to hide it away rather than let it be scattered. That choice had to mean something. Private collectors were more aggressive. A billionaire from Texas flew his private jet to the local airport, showed up at the mansion in a limousine, and offered $30 million for just 5 specific paintings. "I've been searching for these works for 20 years, he said, standing in Marcus's foyer, like he already owned the place. "Name your price." "Anything." "They're not for sale," Marcus said. "Everything's for sale at the right price. 40 million. Final offer. That's 8 million per painting. You'll never get better." Marcus thought about Tobias spending years tracking down each piece, paying fair prices, treating each acquisition as something sacred. The idea of selling them to someone who just wanted to own rare things, to cross items off a collector's checklist, felt wrong in a way Marcus couldn't fully articulate. The answer is still no. The man's expression hardened. "You're making enemies you don't want. The art world has a long memory. When you fail, and you will fail, don't expect help from anyone." Threats now. Marcus was starting to understand what Diane had meant about the art world being cutthroat. Through all of this, Marcus tried to maintain normalcy for Lily. He still made her breakfast, still drove her to school, still helped with homework at the kitchen table. But it was getting harder. Reporters followed them sometimes, shouting questions Marcus refused to answer. Other parents at school looked at him differently now. Some with admiration, others with something that looked like resentment or suspicion. One afternoon, Marcus was called to meet with Lily's teacher. Mrs. Patterson was a kind woman in her 40s who'd taught second grade for 15 years. She closed her classroom door and spoke quietly. "I wanted you to know that some of the other children have been asking Lily questions about the mansion, about whether she's rich now. Some of it isn't very kind." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Is she okay? She's handling it well. But I can see it's bothering her." 8-year-olds don't always understand nuance. They hear millions of dollars, and they think it means something different than it does. That night, Marcus found Lily in her room, the corner bedroom with the blue-tiled fireplace and window seat she'd claimed as hers, staring out at the grounds. She wasn't crying, but her shoulders had that careful hunch he'd seen after Sarah died, that protective curl of someone trying to make themselves smaller. "Hey, sweetheart," Marcus said, sitting beside her on the window seat. "Mrs. Patterson said, some kids have been saying things. Want to talk about it?" Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then, Emma said, "Her mom said we're rich now, and we're going to be snobby, and forget about regular people. Jake said his dad said you're going to sell everything and move away. And Sophia asked if I had a crown because I live in a mansion." Marcus pulled her close. "What did you tell them?" "I said we're the same as we always were. That we're still us. But nobody believed me." "Do you believe it?" Marcus asked. Lily nodded against his shoulder. I think so. We still have macaroni for dinner sometimes. You still check my homework. We still read together at bedtime. Those things didn't change. You're right. Those things didn't change. And they won't change. Marcus took a breath. But some things are changing. We have a responsibility now to take care of something important. That might mean people treat us differently, whether we want them to or not. Do you wish you hadn't found it? Lily asked quietly. The question cut deep. Did he wish that? Life had been simpler when his biggest problem was making rent. But it had also been desperate, hopeless, a grinding struggle just to survive. Now they had security, opportunity, the chance to build something meaningful. But they also had pressure, scrutiny, threats, and an 8-year-old dealing with playground politics she shouldn't have to navigate. I wish people were kinder, Marcus said honestly. I wish finding something beautiful didn't make other people suspicious or jealous or greedy. But I don't wish we hadn't found it. Because now we can do something good with it. Something that would make Mom proud. Lily looked up at him. What would Mom say about all this? Marcus smiled, though his eyes burned. She'd probably say, we better not mess it up. That we have a chance to do something special. And special things require work and sacrifice, and staying true to who we are. She'd remind us that money doesn't make you better or worse than anyone else. It's what you do with it that matters. I miss her, Lily whispered. Me too, sweetheart. Every single day. They sat together as darkness fell over their 12 acres. As the old house settled around them, as somewhere below them in the locked attic, a fortune in art waited for them to decide its future. The community's reaction was mixed, complicated in the way small-town dynamics always were. Some people were genuinely excited, saw the discovery as something that could put Millbrook Falls on the map, bring tourism and economic opportunity. The owner of Rosie's Diner started serving Whitmore coffee and sold T-shirts with the mansion printed on them. The Historical Society began planning an exhibition about Tobias's life. The high school art department reached out to Marcus about possibly using the collection for student programs, but others were suspicious. Why had Marcus been so lucky? What had he really paid for the house? Was the whole thing a scam? Some kind of insurance fraud or money laundering scheme? Property values were going up, which made homeowners happy but made renters worried about being priced out. Traffic increased as curious people drove past the mansion, which annoyed residents who valued their quiet town. Town hall meetings became contentious. Some residents wanted the town to claim the collection through eminent domain, argue that it was too important to be in private hands. Others defended Marcus's right to his property. Arguments broke out in church parking lots, at the grocery store, during Little League games. The discovery had divided Millbrook Falls in ways nobody had anticipated. Marcus tried to stay out of it, focused on the authentication work continuing in the attic. But he heard the whispers, saw the looks, felt the weight of being simultaneously celebrated and resented. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of dealing with a lawsuit from a dealer claiming Tobias had promised him 3 specific paintings, Marcus retreated to the attic. Diane and her team had left for the day. The space was quiet, lit only by the soft lamps they'd installed for examination work. Marcus walked among the pieces they'd already authenticated, studying them the way Tobias must have, trying to understand what the reclusive collector had seen in each one. He found himself at Tobias's desk again, pulled open a drawer he hadn't explored before. Inside were letters, dozens of them, carefully preserved in acid-free envelopes. Marcus pulled one out at random, The return address was a psychiatric hospital in Albany. The date was April 1973. Dear Mr. Whitmore. The letter began in shaky handwriting. Thank you for your visit last month, and for the photographs of the paintings. When everything feels dark and hopeless, when the medications make me feel like I'm not even myself anymore, I think about those paintings. About the colors and the light and the proof that beauty still exists somewhere. Even if I can't reach it right now. You said I could write to you anytime. This is me writing. Please know that your collection, even just knowing it exists, gives me something to hold on to. Yours truly, Margaret Sullivan. Marcus read the letter 3 times, his throat tight. He pulled out another envelope. This one was from a soldier stationed in Vietnam, 1969. Dear Tobias. It read in precise military handwriting. Your letter reached me yesterday. To know that you're keeping those works safe. That something beautiful is surviving this war even if I don't. That means more than I can express. When I close my eyes, I picture the sculpture you described. The dancer, frozen mid-leap. That's what I'm fighting to get back to. The possibility of moments like that. Thank you for keeping the beauty safe. Letter after letter revealed the same pattern. Tobias had corresponded with people across the country, across the world. People struggling with mental illness, soldiers in war zones, prisoners, refugees. People who'd lost everything. He'd written to them about the collection, sent photographs, described pieces in loving detail. He'd given them something to believe in. Proof that beauty and creativity still existed even in their darkest moments. Marcus found letters from a woman who'd survived the Holocaust. Knowing you're preserving these works, that you care about keeping human creation safe from human destruction, helps me believe the world can be better than what I survived. A teenager struggling with addiction. You said beauty is worth fighting for. I'm trying to believe that about myself too. Your collection reminds me that broken things can be preserved, that even damaged art still has value. A widower. Since Margaret died, colors seem gray. But your descriptions of the paintings make me remember that color still exists, that life still holds wonder, even when grief makes it hard to see. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Marcus sat on the floor, surrounded by letters, understanding for the first time that Tobias's collection hadn't just been about preserving art. It had been about preserving hope, about giving people reasons to keep going, about proving that beauty existed even when the world felt unbearable. Tobias had been alone, but he hadn't been isolated. He'd built connections through his collection, had used it to help people he'd never met face challenges he couldn't solve. The weight of that hit Marcus like a physical thing. This wasn't just about money, or museums, or legal battles. This was about continuing something profoundly human. Something that had given people hope for decades. And now Marcus was the one who had to decide how to honor that legacy. He thought about Sarah, about the night she'd been diagnosed with anxiety after Lily was born, the postpartum depression that had nearly broken her. She'd survived it, fought through it, partly because she'd found things to hold on to. Music, art, poetry. She'd spent hours at the small art museum in the city, sitting in front of paintings, letting their beauty remind her that darkness wasn't permanent. Beauty is healing, she'd told Marcus once. When your brain is lying to you, when the chemicals are all wrong and you can't trust your own thoughts, art tells the truth. It exists outside of you. It reminds you that there's more to life than what you're feeling in that moment. Marcus hadn't fully understood then. He'd been supportive but confused, more focused on practical solutions than philosophical ones. But now, reading these letters, he understood. Tobias's collection had been Sarah's museum on a grander scale. A sanctuary, a reminder, a lifeline. He pulled out his phone and texted Diane. "Can you come to the mansion tomorrow morning? I need to show you something." The next morning, Marcus showed Diane the letters. She read through them with growing amazement, her hands trembling slightly as the pattern became clear. "I had no idea," she whispered. "We knew Tobias was reclusive. But he wasn't isolated. He was deeply connected to people who needed what he was preserving. This changes things," Marcus said. "We're not just building a museum. We're continuing something therapeutic, something that helped people survive. The foundation needs to honor that." Diane nodded slowly, her mind already working. "We could establish programs for veterans, for people in treatment facilities, for anyone struggling with trauma or mental health challenges. Art therapy sessions, virtual tours for people who can't travel, outreach to communities that don't typically have access to major museums. This could be revolutionary." Over the following weeks, the vision for the Whitmore Foundation expanded. It would still be a museum, still preserve and display the collection, but it would also be a healing space, a resource for people who needed beauty the way Tobias's correspondence had needed it. They'd offer free admission, establish partnerships with hospitals and veterans organizations, create programs specifically designed for people struggling with mental health challenges. The authentication work continued in parallel. Diane brought in expert after expert, conservators who examined paint layers and canvas weaves, materials scientists who dated pigments and binding agents, art historians who verified stylistic markers and historical context. Each piece was subjected to rigorous analysis. Some authentications were straightforward. Others required weeks of investigation, cross-referencing Tobias's records with historical documents, tracking ownership histories through archives across multiple countries. One painting initially thought to be a lost masterpiece turned out to be a very good contemporary copy, worth thousands but not millions. Tobias's journal revealed he'd known. Purchased as study piece, 1897. Contemporary copy of lost original. Still beautiful, still worthy of preservation. Tobias had been scrupulous about documentation, never claimed pieces were more than they were. Other discoveries exceeded expectations. A small sculpture listed simply as bronze figure, Athens, 1959, turned out to be a missing work by a Greek master, thought lost during World War II. Its authentication made international news. A painting Tobias had acquired for $5,000 and described as possibly important was confirmed as an early work by an artist whose later pieces sold for $50 million or more. The pressure intensified with each authentication. More lawsuits appeared. More collectors made offers. More museums argued they were better equipped to preserve specific pieces. Marcus spent hours with Grace, reviewing legal documents, planning responses, defending decisions. He spent more hours with Diane, making curatorial choices, planning exhibitions, designing programs. And he spent hours alone, walking the grounds of the estate, trying to remember who he'd been 3 months ago. a carpenter, a father, a widower, struggling to survive. That person felt very far away now, like someone from another life. Lily noticed the change in him. One night, she asked, "Daddy, are you okay? You seem tired all the time." Marcus pulled her onto his lap, even though she was getting big for it. "I am tired, sweetheart. This is a lot. More than I ever imagined dealing with. Do you wish it was just us again?" "Before time. Sometimes," Marcus admitted. "But then I think about all the people this collection is going to help. All the kids who'll come here on field trips and see things that make them want to create. All the people struggling who'll find comfort in beauty the way Mom did. And I think maybe being tired is worth it. Mom would be proud of you," Lily said, with the certainty only children possess. "You think so?" "I know so. She always said you were the strongest person she knew, not because you were tough, but because you kept going even when things were hard." Marcus held his daughter close, smelling her shampoo, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. This was why he was doing it. Not for money or recognition, but to build something that would make Sarah proud, something that would give Lily a future that honored both her parents' values. By late November, 3 months after Marcus had bought the mansion for $100, the authentication work was complete. Diane called a meeting with Marcus, Grace, and the foundation board. They gathered in what would eventually be the museum's conference room, currently just an empty space with folding chairs and a card table. Diane stood, holding a thick report. "We've completed the full authentication and valuation. 164 pieces total. 157 authenticated as genuine. 7 pieces are contemporary copies or misattributions, though still historically interesting." Tobias's documentation was remarkably accurate. When he said something was important, it was. When he noted uncertainty, we found reason for that uncertainty. She paused, looked directly at Marcus. "The total authenticated value, based on current market conditions and recent comparable sales, is $253 million. That's the conservative estimate. At auction, with the right marketing and the story behind the collection, it could go higher, much higher. $253 million. The number still didn't feel real, even after months of preparation. Marcus thought about the $100 he'd bid, about the rent he couldn't pay, about the desperation that had brought him to that courthouse auction. "The breakdown," Diane continued, "includes 33 paintings valued at $140 million total, 12 sculptures at $42 million. The rare books and manuscripts are worth approximately $30 million. Ancient artifacts and pottery, another $25 million. The remaining $16 million covers furniture, textiles, jewelry, and decorative objects. Each piece has been photographed, documented, and assigned a conservation priority. The collection is extraordinary, not just in value, but in scope and quality." Grace spoke next. "Legally, we're in good shape. The foundation is established. Ownership is transferred. The remaining lawsuits are weak and will likely be dismissed within 6 months. We have clear documentation for every piece's provenance. Tobias kept meticulous records. We're prepared for any challenges." One of the board members, a museum director from Boston, named Sarah, no relation to Marcus's late wife, but the name still made him smile, asked, "What about funding? Running a museum of this caliber requires significant operating capital." Marcus had been thinking about this. "We sell 20 pieces, not the core collection, but works that are valuable but not central to Tobias's narrative. That should bring in 40 to 50 million. We use 30 million to establish an endowment. Interest and investment returns fund operations. The remaining 10 to 20 million covers restoration of the mansion, installation of proper security and climate control, and initial programming costs. That's sound, Sarah said, nodding. Conservative even. You could sell fewer pieces and still be sustainable if you're careful. They spent the next hour discussing specific pieces to sell, strategic decisions about which works to keep and which could be released at auction. It was harder than Marcus expected, choosing which pieces to let go. He'd spent months with them, felt like he knew their stories. But Tobias's letters reminded him that the collection existed to serve others, not to be hoarded. They selected 20 pieces. 3 paintings that were beautiful, but not historically crucial. 4 sculptures by lesser-known artists. 8 pieces of ancient pottery that duplicated other examples in the collection. 3 rare books that had better preserved copies in major libraries. And 2 pieces of furniture that, while valuable, weren't central to the artistic narrative. We'll auction them through a major house, Diane said. Christie's or Sotheby's. Use the story to drive interest, but frame it as supporting the Foundation's mission, rather than just selling for profit. That narrative will actually increase value. The meeting ended with cautious optimism. They had a plan. They had resources. They had time. The Foundation would work. It would take years, but it would work. After everyone left, Marcus walked through the mansion alone. He'd spent the last 3 months transforming it. The first floor was nearly ready for gallery installation. The second floor had offices and research space taking shape. The third floor needed more work, but the bones were good. Outside, winter was beginning to settle over the grounds, the pond freezing at the edges, the bare trees stark against grey skies. Marcus stood in what would become the main gallery, imagining it filled with people, children pointing at paintings, adults reading placards, someone finding comfort in beauty the way Sarah had, the way Tobias's correspondence had. The collection would finally emerge from darkness, would serve the purpose it had always been meant to serve. His phone buzzed. A text from Lily. Can we have hot chocolate when you get home? Home. This place was home now. Impossibly. The mansion bought for $100, filled with $253 million in art, transformed through sacrifice and determination and grace into something that mattered. Marcus texted back. Of course. Be there in 10 minutes. He locked the mansion, drove the winding driveway to the smaller house on the property where they were living temporarily while the main house was being converted to museum space, and found Lily at the kitchen table with her homework spread out. She looked up and smiled, her face so much like Sarah's, it still took his breath away sometimes. How was your day? She asked, because somehow she'd learned to ask him that, to check on him the way he checked on her. Good, Marcus said, and meant it. Really good. We finished something important today. We know exactly what we have now. We know what we're going to do with it. Are you glad? Lily asked. That we found it? Marcus thought about the question. Really thought about it. The stress and pressure and legal battles and skeptics and opportunists. The weight of responsibility. The loss of anonymity and simple life. But also the possibility. The chance to honor Tobias and Sarah both. The opportunity to build something that would outlast him, that would help people long after he was gone. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm glad. It's hard, but I'm glad. Lily nodded, satisfied. Good. Now, can you help me with my math? I don't understand fractions. And just like that, they were back to the ordinary rhythms of their life. Homework and hot chocolate. A father helping his daughter with math problems. The fortune in the attic existed. The foundation would be built. The museum would open. But first, there were fractions to solve, and dinner to make, and bedtime stories to read. The weight of fortune was real, but so was this. A child's trust, a father's love, the simple joy of being together. $253 million couldn't buy that. It could only, if Marcus did this right, help protect it. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Marcus returned to the attic one final time. He stood in the center of the space, surrounded by authenticated masterpieces, and spoke to the ghosts that lingered there. I'm going to finish what you started, Tobias. I'm going to make sure these pieces help people the way you wanted them to. I'm going to honor Eleanor and James and everyone else you lost, and I'm going to do it in a way that would make my Sarah proud. The attic was silent, but Marcus felt something settle in his chest. Not certainty he'd never have that again, but purpose, direction. The knowledge that he was doing something right, something that mattered, something worth the sacrifice. He descended the stairs, locked the door behind him, and went home to where Lily slept peacefully, dreaming whatever 8-year-olds dreamed, safe in the knowledge that her father would protect her and build her a future worth inheriting. The fortune was real. $253 million. Authenticated and verified. But more real was this. A promise kept, a legacy honored, a life rebuilt from ruins into something beautiful. And that, Marcus was learning, was worth more than any painting in the world. The auction took place on a gray February morning at Sotheby's in Manhattan, 18 weeks after Marcus had bought the Whitmore estate for $100. He stood in the back of the auction room, uncomfortable in the suit Diane had insisted he buy, watching as the 20 pieces he'd selected went under the hammer one by one. Each sale felt like losing a small piece of Tobias. Even though Marcus knew it was necessary, knew that Tobias himself would have approved of this sacrifice to preserve the whole. The first piece, a landscape painting by a lesser-known impressionist, opened at $2 million. The bidding was fierce. Paddles rising across the room, phone banks lighting up with remote bids from collectors across the world. When the hammer fell at $3.4 million, Marcus felt his knees weaken. That was more than he'd earned in his entire life as a carpenter. And it was just the first piece. By the time the final lot closed, a bronze sculpture that brought $4.2 million, the total had reached $47 million. $47 million from 20 pieces that represented less than 15% of the collection's value. Marcus stood in the back of the auction room, surrounded by people casually spending millions, and felt the full weight of what he'd inherited crash over him again. This wasn't just responsibility anymore. This was transformation. This was the power to change lives, to build something that would outlast him by generations. Diane found him after the auction, her eyes bright with excitement and relief. $47 million, Marcus. That's $7 million more than we projected. The foundation is fully funded. We can do everything we planned and more. Marcus nodded, still processing. A woman in an elegant dress approached them, introduced herself as representing the buyer of the landscape painting. My client wants you to know that he's honored to be part of preserving the Whitmore legacy. The story of what you're building, it matters to him. He wants to donate an additional $500,000 to the foundation's educational programs. That's very generous, Marcus managed. Not generous, the woman said. Appropriate. What you're doing, keeping the collection together, using it to serve others instead of enriching yourself. That's rare. People want to support that. After she left, Diane smiled at Marcus. Welcome to the world of philanthropy. When you do something right, when you honor the right values, people want to be part of it. That donation won't be the last. She was right. Over the following months, as word spread about the Whitmore Foundation's mission, donations arrived from unexpected sources. A veteran who'd been helped by art therapy sent $100 with a note. I understand what beauty can do for broken people. Thank you for making it accessible. A retired teacher donated $10,000 so students can see what humans are capable of creating. A foundation focused on mental health treatment pledged $50,000 annually to support the therapeutic programs. Marcus learned that legacy wasn't just about what you left behind. It was about what you inspired others to contribute. The transformation of the mansion began in earnest that spring. Marcus had always been a carpenter, always worked with his hands, but he'd never tackled anything on this scale. The mansion needed everything. New electrical systems that could handle museum-grade lighting and climate control, plumbing repairs, structural reinforcement, window restoration, roof replacement, floor refinishing. The list was endless, daunting, impossible, except it wasn't impossible. Because Marcus wasn't alone anymore. The first person to show up was Tom Riley, a retired contractor who'd lived in Millbrook Falls for 40 years. He knocked on the mansion's door one Saturday morning with his tool belt and a thermos of coffee. Heard you could use some help, he said simply. I did restoration work before I retired. This house deserves to be brought back right. Then came others. Jorge Mendez, an electrician who'd been laid off when the local factory closed. Sarah Kim, not the museum director, but a younger woman who'd apprenticed as a carpenter in Boston before moving home to care for her aging parents. Old Man Patterson, who'd done masonry for 50 years and wanted one last big job before my hands give out completely. They didn't come for money, though Marcus paid them fairly from the foundation's budget. They came because the project mattered, because the mansion was part of their town's history, because being part of something beautiful was its own reward. Marcus found himself leading a crew of 12, then 15, then 20 people. He drew up plans, delegated tasks, solved problems as they arose. The carpenter, who'd been struggling to survive, became a project manager, a leader, someone people looked to for direction. It surprised him how naturally it came, how his years of construction work had prepared him for this, without him realizing. The first floor transformed into gallery space. Marcus and his crew carefully removed non-load-bearing walls to open up rooms while preserving the Victorian character. They restored original moldings, uncovered stained glass windows that had been boarded over, refinished hardwood floors to their former glory. In the conservatory, they replaced cracked glass panels and installed climate control systems that would protect both plants and occasional displays. The second floor became offices, research space, and conservation labs. Diane worked with specialists to design proper storage for works, not on display, climate-controlled vaults, where temperature and humidity were monitored constantly. A small library was established, where researchers could access Tobias's journals and correspondence, study the collection's provenance, contribute to the ongoing scholarship. The third floor, Marcus preserved as a glimpse into Tobias's life. They restored his bedroom, his study, even the small workshop where he'd done conservation work. Visitors would be able to see where Tobias had lived and worked, understand the man behind the collection. It felt important to Marcus that Tobias not be forgotten, that his dedication and sacrifice be honored with more than just a plaque on the wall. Through it all, Lily adapted to their changing life with the resilience of childhood. The initial attention had faded as other stories captured the news cycle. She'd made friends in town, real friends who cared about her, not about what her father had found. She helped with the renovation sometimes, painting walls or organizing tools, taking pride in contributing to the project. Marcus had used some of the auction proceeds to establish a trust for Lily's education. Not the full amount she'd need. He didn't want her to grow up thinking money solved everything, but enough that she'd be able to attend any college she wanted, pursue any dream, without the financial stress that had defined Marcus's own young adulthood. Sarah would have wanted that for her, would have insisted on it. But Marcus also kept a few pieces separate from the main collection, works that would remain in their private residence for Lily to grow up with. A small landscape painting that Sarah would have loved, full of light and hope. A sculpture of a girl reading, which reminded Marcus of Lily curled up with her books. 3 rare first editions that Lily could read when she was older, could pass down to her own children someday. These pieces wouldn't be displayed in the museum. They were Lily's inheritance, her connection to the legacy her father was building. "Why these?" Lily asked one evening, looking at the painting now hung in their living room. "Because beauty shouldn't only exist in museums," Marcus said. Tobias understood that. He kept these works close to him, lived with them. "I want you to grow up knowing that art isn't just something you visit on field trips. It's something that can be part of your daily life, something that makes ordinary days a little more beautiful." One afternoon in late May, Marcus was on a ladder in the main gallery, installing lighting fixtures, when Patricia from the library appeared with an older man. Marcus recognized him immediately, the silver-haired man from the auction, the one who'd stared at him with that unreadable expression, who'd nodded as if acknowledging something Marcus couldn't see. "Marcus," Patricia said, "this is Peter Whitmore. He says he's Tobias's nephew." Marcus climbed down slowly, wiping his hands on his work jeans. Up close, Peter looked to be in his mid-70s, with kind eyes and a face lined with years, but not hardened by them. He held his hat in his hands, a gesture of respect that reminded Marcus of his own grandfather. "Mr. Whitmore," Marcus said, "I wasn't expecting family to come forward." "Most of the family didn't care about Tobias," Peter said quietly. "Thought he was wasting his fortune, hiding away in this house. After his wife and son died, they tried to have him declared incompetent. They wanted control of his estate, wanted to sell everything. Did they succeed? No. Tobias was eccentric, but he wasn't incompetent. He fought them off, cut ties with everyone except me. I was the only one who still spoke to him, and even that was rare. Christmas cards mostly. A phone call once a year." Peter looked around the gallery, taking in the restoration work, the careful attention to preserving the mansion's character. "The last time I spoke to him was 92. He told me he'd hidden his collection, said the world would get it when it was ready, not before." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "Why didn't you come forward earlier, when he died?" "Because I respected his wishes," Peter said simply. Tobias wanted his collection to go to someone who would appreciate it, not to relatives who'd sell it piece by piece. "When I heard you were creating a foundation, keeping it together, honoring his vision, His voice caught slightly. I knew he'd chosen well, even if his choice was made through fate, rather than directly. Peter reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Tobias gave this to me in '92. He said if his plan worked, if someone good found the collection, I should give them this. Marcus took the envelope with shaking hands. His name wasn't on it, because Tobias hadn't known who would find the collection. Instead, it read simply, "To whoever fortune finds." Marcus opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Tobias's elegant handwriting, the same script Marcus had come to know from the journals. "Dear friend," it began, "if you're reading this, then my nephew Peter has found you worthy. That means more than you know. Peter was the only one who understood what I was trying to do, who saw that the collection wasn't about wealth or status, but about preserving something essential about human nature, our capacity to create beauty, even in darkness. I spent my life collecting beautiful things because beauty is truth made visible, but I learned too late that beauty isn't meant to be hoarded. It's meant to be shared, to remind us of what we're capable of, what we can create when we care about something more than ourselves. You now hold in your hands 40 years of my life. I ask nothing except that you remember. These works were made by human hands and human hearts. They represent the best of what we are. Treat them as such. And if you find yourself overwhelmed by the responsibility, remember that I chose this for you, not randomly, but through faith that the right person would see past the crumbling facade to the treasure beneath. You saw it. That makes you worthy. Build something beautiful. Create something that lasts. And know that somewhere, somehow, I'm grateful. With hope for the future. Tobias Whitmore. Marcus read the letter twice, tears blurring his vision. When he looked up, Peter was watching him with understanding in his eyes. He was a complicated man, Peter said, difficult sometimes, impossible even, but he believed in the power of art to change lives. He believed beauty mattered. It does, Marcus said hoarsely. Peter smiled, the expression transforming his lined face. Then you understand him better than his own family ever did. He held out his hand. If you need anything, stories about his life, information about the collection, help understanding his motivations, please reach out. I'm the last one who knew him. I'd like to help if I can. Marcus shook his hand, holding on perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Would you consider joining the foundation board? We need someone who knew Tobias, who can help us honor his memory properly. Peter's eyes brightened. I'd be honored. That evening, Marcus showed Lily the letter. She read it carefully, her young face serious with concentration. When she finished, she looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than 8 years should allow. He sounds lonely, she said quietly, but also hopeful, like he was sad about what he'd lost, but still believed good things could happen. Marcus pulled her close. That's exactly right, sweetheart, and now we get to prove him right. The months blurred together in a rhythm of construction and planning. By late summer, the mansion was unrecognizable from the crumbling structure Marcus had first walked into. The exterior had been repaired and repainted in historically accurate colors, deep gray with white trim. The gingerbread details picked out in subtle burgundy. The turrets had been restored, their pointed roofs newly shingled. The wraparound porch was solid again, inviting, with rocking chairs where visitors could sit and contemplate what they'd seen inside. The grounds had been transformed too. Marcus had hired a landscape crew that included several out-of-work residents from town. They'd cleared the overgrown gardens, revealing the original layout Tobias had maintained. Stone paths had been repaired, flower beds replanted with period-appropriate species. The pond had been dredged and restocked with fish. The old fountain had been restored to working order, its gentle splash now audible from the porch. Jobs had been created not just during construction, but permanent positions. The foundation hired security staff, maintenance workers, administrative assistants, education coordinators, tour guides, 23 full-time positions, 12 part-time roles. In a town of 2,800, that made a real difference. The unemployment rate dropped. Local businesses benefited from increased traffic. Property values rose, though not so dramatically that long-time residents were priced out. The town's initial suspicion had largely faded, replaced by cautious pride. Millbrook Falls was now known for something beyond being a dot on the map. Tour buses were scheduled to begin stopping in town when the museum opened. The diner expanded. The hardware store hired more staff. The library received increased funding from the county. Recognition that the town was growing. Not everyone was happy. Some residents still grumbled about traffic and change, about outsiders coming in and disrupting their quiet lives. But most had come to see the museum as an opportunity, a chance for their small town to matter in ways it never had before. Marcus himself had changed in ways he was still discovering. The carpenter who'd struggled to feed his daughter had become someone else, a foundation director, a community leader, someone people looked to for guidance and decisions. He'd learned to speak at public meetings, to negotiate with contractors and donors, to balance preservation with accessibility, history with innovation. But more importantly, he'd learned to accept help. For years after Sarah's death, he'd tried to do everything himself, had seen asking for assistance as weakness or burden. Now he understood that accepting help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. The mansion had been restored because dozens of people had contributed their skills. The foundation was working because experts had donated their time. The collection was being preserved because people across the country believed in the mission. Legacy, Marcus learned, was always a team effort. Lily had changed too. She was 9 now, taller, more confident. She gave tours to visitors who came for previews, explaining facts about the collection she'd absorbed through osmosis. She talked about Tobias like someone she'd known, understood his story and his sacrifice. She'd started drawing and painting herself, spending hours in the garden with a sketchbook, capturing the beauty her father was working so hard to preserve. One evening, Marcus found her in front of the landscape painting he'd kept for their private residence, the one full of light and hope. She was trying to copy it in watercolors, her young hands not quite achieving the effect she wanted, but trying nonetheless. "It's harder than it looks," she said, frustrated. "Most worthwhile things are," Marcus replied, sitting beside her. "But look how much you've learned already. 6 months ago, you couldn't mix colors like that." Lily studied her painting critically. "Do you think Mom would have liked what we're doing here? With the museum and everything?" Marcus felt the familiar ache of Sarah's absence, but it was softer now, worn smooth by time and purpose. "I know she would have. Your mom believed art saved her life once, when she was struggling with depression after you were born. She spent hours at museums, letting beauty remind her that darkness wasn't permanent. That's what we're building here. A place where people can find that same comfort. I wish she could see it. Lily whispered. Me too, sweetheart. Every single day. They sat together in comfortable silence, the painting watching over them. Light captured in oil and canvas, reminding them that beauty persisted even in absence. The grand opening was scheduled for October 17th, exactly 18 months after Marcus had bought the mansion for $100. The date was intentional, chosen by Marcus to mark the anniversary of the gamble that had changed everything. Diane had wanted a bigger celebration, a gala event with major donors and celebrities. But Marcus insisted on something different. The first day would be reserved for locals, residents of Millbrook Falls and the surrounding towns. The people who'd watched the mansion transform, who'd contributed labor or support, or simply patience, as their small town adjusted to change. They deserved to be first. They were part of this legacy too. The night before the opening, Marcus walked through the completed museum alone. The galleries were ready, paintings hung in perfect lighting, sculptures positioned to be viewed from multiple angles. Information placards told the story of each piece, where Tobias had found it, what it represented, why it mattered. But they also told other stories, how Tobias had used the collection to help people, letters from those he'd corresponded with, evidence of a life spent in service to beauty and those who needed it. In the center of the main gallery hung the portrait from Florence, the merchant's daughter, who'd been the first piece Marcus had uncovered. She seemed to watch him with knowing eyes, as if she'd been waiting all these decades for someone to finally see her properly, to bring her into the light. Marcus stood in front of her for a long time, thinking about the journey that had led him here. 18 months ago, he'd been desperate, barely surviving, unsure if he could provide for his daughter, or if hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. Now he stood in a museum he'd built, director of a foundation worth $250 million, guardian of a legacy that would outlive him by generations. But the numbers didn't matter. What mattered was the veteran who'd written to say the museum's art therapy program had helped him manage his PTSD, the teenager who'd spent hours in the galleries and decided to pursue art school, the family who'd visited during a preview and left a note in the guest book. Thank you for reminding us that beauty still exists. That was Tobias's real legacy. Not the dollar value of the collection, but its power to heal, to inspire, to remind people of human capacity for creation instead of destruction. And now, Marcus was the one carrying that forward, making it accessible, sharing it the way Tobias had always intended. He thought about Sarah, about how she would have loved this place, how she would have walked these galleries with tears in her eyes, grateful that beauty like this existed in the world. He wished desperately that she could be here, could see what he'd built, could know that their daughter would grow up, surrounded by art and purpose, and the knowledge that her parents had contributed something meaningful. I did it, Sarah, he whispered to the empty gallery. I built something that lasts, something that would make you proud. The portrait of the merchant's daughter seemed to smile in the soft lighting, her painted eyes reflecting centuries of patience, as if she'd known all along that the right person would eventually find her and bring her home. The next morning dawned clear and bright, autumn sun streaming through the restored windows and setting the galleries aglow. Marcus stood on the front porch in his suit, still uncomfortable, but he was getting used to it, with Lily beside him in a dress she'd picked out herself. Diane was there, and Grace, and Peter, Whitmore, and the full foundation board. The restoration crew stood proudly, their work finally complete and ready to be seen. A line had formed at the gate. residents of Millbrook Falls, waiting for the doors to open. Marcus recognized faces. Tom Riley, who'd helped with the restoration, Patricia from the library, the mayor, teachers from Lily's school, the owner of Rosie's Diner, old Mr. Patterson the mason, families he'd seen around town, people he'd nodded to at the grocery store, his community, waiting to see what he'd built. At exactly 10 o'clock, Marcus stepped forward. He'd prepared remarks, worked on them for weeks, but standing there, looking out at his neighbors, he set the notes aside and spoke from his heart. 18 months ago, I bought this house because I needed a home for my daughter. I was desperate, broke, grieving. I bid $100 because it was all I could risk. What I found was more than I could have imagined. But not in the way you might think. He paused, looking at the mansion behind him. Yes, there was art worth millions, but more importantly, there was purpose. There was a reminder that beauty matters, that creativity and dedication can change the world. Tobias Whitmore spent 40 years building this collection, not for profit or prestige, but because he believed beautiful things deserved protection. He used it to help people who were struggling, to give them hope when hope was hard to find. Marcus's voice caught slightly. My wife Sarah struggled with depression. Art helped her heal, reminded her that darkness wasn't permanent. After she died, I forgot that lesson. I forgot that beauty still existed, that hope was still possible. This house, this collection, it taught me again. And now, we get to share that with all of you. He looked at Lily, who smiled up at him with pride. The Whitmore Foundation isn't just a museum. It's a promise that beauty will be preserved, that art will be accessible to everyone, that no one has to pay admission to be reminded of human potential. It's a place where veterans can find peace, where students can find inspiration, where anyone struggling can find comfort. It's what Tobias built, and what we're honored to continue. He gestured to the doors. So, welcome. Welcome to the Whitmore Foundation and Heritage Museum. Welcome to see what dedication and vision can create. And welcome to remember that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones we choose to share. The doors opened. The crowd filed in, and Marcus watched their faces as they entered the galleries. Gasps of awe, tears of joy, the quiet contemplation that great art inspires. Children pointing excitedly at sculptures. Adults reading placards with growing understanding. The veteran from town standing in front of a painting, his eyes closed, breathing deeply as if the beauty in front of him was oxygen he'd been deprived of. Peter Whitmore approached Marcus, his own eyes bright with emotion. Tobias would be so proud, he said quietly. Not just of the collection, but of what you've made it mean. He spent years alone in this house, protecting these works. You've brought them into the world in exactly the way he hoped someone would. The day blurred past in a stream of faces and gratitude. People thanked Marcus, told him how much the museum meant to them, shared stories of how art had impacted their lives. A woman whose son had died in Afghanistan said the memorial gallery honoring Tobias's own lost son had moved her to tears. A teenager mentioned he'd never cared about art before, but now he was considering studying art history. A little girl told Lily that seeing women painters represented in the collection made her think maybe she could be an artist too. By evening, when the last visitors had left and the staff had locked the doors, Marcus stood in the empty foyer, feeling something he hadn't felt since Sarah died. Complete. Not happy grief never fully left. and he still missed his wife with an ache that would probably never fade. But complete, purposeful, like he was doing what he was meant to do, building what he was meant to build. Lily found him there, took his hand. "We did good, didn't we, Daddy?" "Daddy, yeah, sweetheart. We did real good. We did real good." They walked through the galleries together one more time, the evening light streaming through tall windows and painting the walls gold. The collection that had been hidden for 30 years now glowed in perfect presentation, each piece given the space and lighting it deserved. Tobias's vision realized at last. In the months that followed, the museum exceeded every expectation. Attendance was strong, not just from tourists but from repeat visitors, people who came back again and again to spend time with specific pieces. The educational programs filled immediately, with waiting lists for art therapy sessions and veteran support groups. Schools from across the state scheduled field trips. The Artist in Residence program attracted applications from talented creators who wanted to work in the space Tobias had blessed. The foundation's endowment grew through careful management and additional donations. They were able to expand programming, offer more scholarships, reach more communities. The museum became known not just for its collection but for its mission, its commitment to accessibility and healing. Articles were written, awards were given, but Marcus cared less about recognition than about the guest book comments. "This place saved my life. I forgot beauty like this existed. Thank you for sharing this with the world." One afternoon in the following spring, Marcus was in his office reviewing plans for a new conservation lab when his assistant knocked. "There's someone here to see you," says she knew Tobias. An elderly woman entered, probably in her 80s, moving slowly with a cane but with bright, intelligent eyes. "Mr. Hayes? My name is Margaret Sullivan. I believe you have some letters I wrote to Tobias Whitmore many years ago." Marcus stood immediately, recognizing the name from the correspondence he'd found. "Miss Sullivan, please, sit down. Yes, I have your letters. They helped me understand what Tobias was trying to do with the collection." Margaret lowered herself into a chair, her hands trembling slightly on her cane. "I was in a psychiatric hospital in the 70s. Very dark time. Tobias wrote to me, sent photographs of paintings from his collection. He said beauty was worth holding on to even when everything else felt hopeless. Those letters, those images, they got me through. I never forgot." Her eyes filled with tears. "I heard about the museum, about what you're doing with art therapy programs. I had to come, had to see that what helped me is now helping others." Marcus came around his desk, knelt beside her chair. "Your letters showed me that Tobias wasn't just collecting art. He was using it to give people hope. That's what this foundation is built on, the idea that beauty heals." "He saved my life," Margaret said simply. "And now you're doing the same for others. That's a legacy worth more than any dollar amount." They talked for over an hour, Margaret sharing memories of Tobias's letters, the impact they'd had, how she'd carried his words with her through decades of recovery and eventual healing. Before she left, Marcus took her through the galleries, showed her some of the pieces Tobias had described to her in letters 50 years earlier. She wept in front of them, touching the frames gently, as if greeting old friends. "Thank you," she said as Marcus walked her to her car. "Thank you for finishing what he started." Marcus watched her drive away, feeling the weight and wonder of what he'd become part of. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Tobias and Margaret and Sarah and every person who'd ever needed beauty to survive darkness. It was about Lily and future generations who'd walk these galleries and remember that humans were capable of creating something transcendent. That evening, Marcus sat on the porch with Lily, watching the sun set over their 12 acres. The grounds were beautiful now, maintained by a small staff, open to the public during museum hours. Families picnicked on the lawn. Couples walked hand in hand through the gardens. Children played by the pond, their laughter carrying on the spring air. "I've been thinking," Lily said, now 10 years old, and growing more like Sarah every day, "about what I want to be when I grow up." "Yeah? What's that?" Quote, "I think I want to help people the way you're helping them. Maybe a therapist, or a teacher, or something with art. Something that makes things better." Marcus pulled her close, his heart swelling with pride and love and gratitude. "Your mom would be so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. Do you think she knows about all of this?" Marcus looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "I think if there's any way for her to know, she does. And I think she'd say we did exactly what we should have done. We took something broken and made it beautiful. We took our grief and turned it into something that helps other people. That's what she always taught us to do." They sat in comfortable silence. Father and daughter, survivors of loss who'd found purpose in preservation, who'd built a legacy from desperation and $100, and the courage to believe that fortune favored the brave. Anyone can change their life if they're brave enough to gamble on hope, and wise enough to build something bigger than themselves when fortune finds them. As morning light streams through the restored windows of the Whitmore Foundation, Marcus Hayes no longer sees himself as just a carpenter or a struggling single father. He sees himself as the guardian of a promise kept, a legacy preserved, a future built not on wealth, but on the belief that beautiful things deserve beautiful outcomes. The mansion that stood empty for 30 years now welcomes thousands of visitors annually. The collection that was hidden in darkness now brings light to those who need it most. The carpenter who bought a crumbling house for $100 built something worth far more than $250 million. He built hope, healing, and a home for beauty that will serve humanity for generations to come. Because for Marcus, and for every person who will walk through these galleries in the years ahead, the story isn't about finding treasure in an attic. It's about finding the courage to honor what was hidden, to share what was kept secret, and to prove that sometimes the best inheritance we leave isn't money at all. It's meaning. It's purpose. It's the reminder that even in our darkest moments, beauty persists, hope survives, and one person's courage can change countless lives. The mansion stands now as a beacon, not of wealth, but of what happens when desperation meets opportunity, when loss transforms into legacy, when a father's love for his daughter inspires him to build something that will outlast them both. The lights glow warm in the windows every evening, welcoming all who need reminding that beauty still exists, that art still heals, that humanity is still capable of creating something transcendent. And somewhere in the main gallery, the portrait of a merchant's daughter still watches with knowing eyes, patient as ever, finally home after a century and a half, finally seen by the thousands who needed to see her, finally serving the purpose for which she was created, to remind us, in brushstrokes and color and captured light, that beauty is truth made visible, and truth is what saves us in the end. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories waiting for you. Click to keep discovering, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe fortune favors those brave enough to see past the broken to the beautiful beneath.